Hello, everybody. Welcome to another TFE Live. This is our show number 269 for the 03 of 03, the 3rd of March, 2020. Looks like an auspicious date. I'm your host, Tom Ehman, along with, of course, Julia Wedekind on the other side of the studio, our coordinating producer and my co-host, really. Julia, I trust you are well?
Yes.
Any hot tips before we get going?
No.
No hot tips?
I've been dealing with plumbers this morning, so.
God, you're above me, so I hope nothing's coming down on our heads here in the studio from your place.
I do, too.
Julia, you like to say?
Please take this opportunity to like, share, and subscribe.
And likewise, we hope you'll go over to the main website and become a patron via Patreon on sailingillustrated.com. Thank you very much for tuning in, and welcome to what is Super Tuesday in the U.S. Those of you outside of the country may not know that this is a big primary day here in the U.S. where there are votes between within the party, the Democrat and Republican parties, to help nominate their candidates. 450 delegates to the national conventions on the line here in California, and another big state, of course, is Texas, 228 delegates, and then so on. Hence the term Super Tuesday applying today. And Julie, you voted, right?
I did, by mail weeks ago.
I don't think your vote does much here in California.
It doesn't, but I do it anyway.
And if anybody needs to know why her vote doesn't count much, well, she's voting for a party that is not in power here and hasn't been for years. Okay, let's carry on. Just a reminder to all of you, outside the country at least, we go back on daylight savings time, this croutonic, idiotic daylight savings time. I don't know how you feel. I should have made this the question of the day, but I would get rid of daylight savings time and either stay on wintertime or summertime. But we go on summertime, as most of the rest of the world calls it, this Sunday. So we will be an hour earlier for just about all of you in the world. We will be going live at 2000 now UTC, Greenwich Mean Time, 2000, 2000 UTC, 2100 CET, so we're only 9 hours. Let me think, did I do that number right? Yeah, I did, instead of 2200. And this for 4 weeks until Europe goes on daylight time. In the meantime, we are now 4 hours ahead of you in New Zealand. You will be watching us live at 0900 plus one on the next day in New Zealand, and 0700 in Sydney, an Australian Eastern Daylight Time, until you all go off daylight time, which again is it's a different period. It's not the same time. In other words, Europe, we've changed now. Europe does it in a month's time, and I don't know when Australia and New Zealand change, but we're in that weird period twice a year where everything is mucked up. I want to thank Jody Shields. He looks like Richard Slater. That's why whenever I see Jody Shields there on the right, I think that's Richard Slater. They look a lot alike. They're both Aussies, both dear friends by now. But Jody Shields and Pedro Foiling Sailor, who came on live with their iPhone. It was a terrific exchange. They filled us in, Jody in particular, what was going on in Sail GP. Jody, of course, did the play-by-play commentary last year. This year, Jody is doing the play-by-play from on the water for the app. And if you haven't downloaded the app, do download the app, the Sail GP app, and you'll hear Jody's dulcet tones. Pedro's was driving around. And we'll see if Jody then gets picked up and moved around the world, because it is nice to have a commentator with his skill.
On the water. On
the water, exactly, yeah. Julia. Did you see the comments that Richard Gladwell, he wrote a piece about it, and he just lauded the job that Jody did.
Oh, I missed it. I have to go see it, yeah.
And had some other good observations. If you haven't seen Richard Gladwell's piece, that it comes out on Monday, and it's an email newsletter that goes out on Mondays, maybe Tuesday mornings here now. I can't remember. Get it. But do have a look, Julia. It was good stuff. Okay. Standing by in Jamestown, Rhode Island, is today's guest, the esteemed journalist, author, raconteur, sailor, father, Chris Musler. And I've only gotten to know Chris a little bit of late, but he is a freelance journalist working in the field since '95. He's been a newspaper reporter, public relations manager for U.S. Sailing, spokesman for the governor of Rhode Island, which cannot be an easy job, and a professional sailor. His work appears in magazines and newspapers around the world, including and especially the New York Times. He seems to have become, Chris has, the writer of record about our beloved sport for the Times. Outside magazine, Yachting World, Rhode Island Monthly, Wooden Boat, and more. Let's just go right to him, shall we, Julia?
Mm-hmm.
Let's welcome Chris, who is live from Jamestown, Rhode Island. Chris.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
For those who aren't familiar with Newport, I didn't put a map up here, but anybody who's been to Newport realizes that Jamestown is a nice, beautiful town out on Connecticut Island, which is in the middle of Narragansett Bay, splits the East Passage and the West Passage. And if you're coming from the mainland, if you're coming from New York, for example, and driving up to Newport, you first go across the Jamestown Bridge from the mainland out to Connecticut Island, kind of past the beautiful Jamestown where you're living, Chris, and then on the Claiborne Pell Bridge, the Newport Bridge, over to lovely little New Portia. And you are in one of the garden spots of the world.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Right now we're in the new house that we built last year. And we moved down from Common Fence Point, which is actually the northern tip of Aquidneck Island, the island that Newport's on. And strangely enough, when we closed on this property, we serendipitously sold our house to Ken Reed, who I will see this week at New York Yacht Club's having a young member event, which I'm no longer a young member, I guess, but I'll see him on Thursday.
Neither is Reed, so.
Well, he'll be there and I'll be there. So, but he's in our old house. But here we are in Jamestown, right on Dutch Harbor, and we're just loving it right now.
Okay, well, delighted to have you with us. We've got a split screen, so when we get serious here in a few minutes with your stuff, we can talk with each other and at each other. And I'm really delighted to have a younger guest. And we've had a fair few young guests. We had Lily Zhu.
Oh, yes.
Not too long ago. Julie, remember that?
Indeed.
And it's really, as I say, Chris, it's a show about cool people. And you certainly are cool people and doing some very interesting things, which we will talk about in a minute. But first,
great.
I want to talk about this, and I don't want to tease it to the end of the show. A lot of you are on here to see what is this world sailing madness that has been going on in the past couple days, well, in the past 3 years. Here's the deal. This is the World Sailing Board of Directors. The World Sailing Board of Directors met in London on Friday and Saturday, I think it was late last week. In the center is the president, Mr. Kim Andersen. Next to him on the right, his left, but on the right in this shot is the tallest one there in the lot, Gary Jobson from the U.S. And second from the left, because these names are going to come up, is an American now living for a long time in Uruguay. He's more Uruguayan, and his name is Scott Perry. Now, why is this interesting? Well, it's not really. In fact, Julie, I promised you I would keep this light and lively.
Yes.
But the most incredible thing happened in the last 24, 30 hours. This guy, as you know, is the president. And that is the late, he's not late, he didn't die, but he's no longer with us, thank goodness. That is, of course, Kim Andersen from Denmark with the non-sailing CEO, former CEO of World Sailing, Andy Hunt, who left late last year. But the two of them conspired, most of us think, a lot of us think, conspired to ruin the sport. I mean, they came in and they were starting making lots of changes. Mr. Hunt had ID, non-sailor, said, I'm going to make this like rugby, or I'm going to make this sport, commercially successful. We're going to have a lot of sponsors. We're going to sell sponsors. We're going to have a move from Southampton to a fancy office in central London, in one of the most expensive parts of one of the most expensive cities in the world. And Kim Andersen said, this is going to be great, and we'll have more money, and I'll fly around the world, and maybe I'll get to be a member of the IOC. I kid you not. So e-sailing came along, and this World Cup got ramped up, and they did big media deals, and they spent money like proverbial drunken sailors. Well, thank goodness Mr. Hunt is gone, but Mr. Andersen remains. And at this executive board meeting a few days ago, that's my phone for a change.
Yeah.
We'll decline that. At this executive board meeting the other day, the board was told by Mr. Andersen, and we can now tell you we've discovered what the real problem is in world sailing. The board was told by Mr. Andersen something that was completely false, and the board just sort of went along with it. And on Monday, I got an email saying, please find attached letter from World Form. Look at this. Who writes this stuff? This is our world governing body in their office in the World Sailing Executive Office. Please find attached letter form, meaning from, World Sailing Vice President. Well, it's from two World Sailing Vice Presidents because Mr. Andersen told the board that he was tired of these two particular vice presidents telling me stuff, which wasn't true, and that I had said on the show of February 18th that the two of them were telling me stuff, which of course was also not true. So here's the letter that came attached to that email. Tom Ehman addressed the Beach Street Yacht Club, yada, yada, from Gary Jobson and Scott Perry. Now look at those signatures. If they'd produced the letter at the board meeting and asked people to sign it, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that those are probably cut and paste or, signatures, right? Well, they weren't. As it turns out, they were cut and paste, rather. And here's what the letter said. Dear Mr. Ehman, on February 18th, the Sailing Illustrated's TFE live show was aired on Facebook. The show raised several issues regarding world sailing, including misleading and inaccurate information about the working of our organization, the finances of our organization, and the World Sailing Trust. In the show, you specifically mentioned us, meaning Jobson and Perry, Scott Perry, as the source of this misleading and inaccurate information. We unequivocally deny these allegations and quite honestly, who writes this stuff? Find that your actions and attacks against us in world sailing to be completely unjustified. We ask that you immediately retract your statements, especially your claim that we are the source of your misinformation. Well, guess what? I never claimed that. I have never talked to Scott Perry. I don't know the gentleman. I've never even had a communication with him until today. He sent me a very nice email. Gary, I've known all my adult life. In fact, since we raced against each other as college sailors. And I texted Gary yesterday. I said, hey, have you seen this letter? Did you sign this letter? He called me up. I won't discuss the details, but in effect, he confirmed that, no, he had not seen the letter. He had not authorized the letter to be sent. He had not signed the letter. Julia, somebody had cut and pasted a signature onto the letter. Now, and Gary's a real gentleman. I had said in that show nice things about Gary, saying, he's worked behind the scenes to get rid of Mr. Hunt, which everybody knows. He's told that to any number of people, and I commended Gary for it any number of times for having worked to help get rid of Mr. Hunt. Scott Perry, as I said, I've never mentioned his name. I did in that show after talking about Scott McLeod, who is the esteemed commercial director for New York Yacht Club's American Magic and started the World Match Racing Tour and on and on and on. I've known forever. I did mention Scott in the context of World Sailing's ridiculous sponsorship policies of trying to have sponsors, trying to go out and sell sponsorships. And I said, well, as Scott says, after we talked about Scott McLeod, don't count your chickens before they hatch. It's one thing to have a memorandum of agreement. Don't count that as a sponsorship deal. Until you have a contract, until you have the check in the mail, don't count on a sponsorship deal. Well, of course, what happened is that World Sailing has gone off, as everybody knows, and they're $2.2 million in the hole right now, I'm reliably informed, headed for $3 million in the hole by the end of this year, relying on future television revenues from the Olympics, which may or may not happen. In any event, I was not talking about Scott Perry. I have never talked to Scott Perry. As far as I know, he's a very bright, successful guy living in Uruguay, American, because I wouldn't quote him, and I haven't quoted him. So today, and I didn't even send him an email yesterday. I have had no contact with him until today when this email arrived. Dear Mr. Tom Ehman, I owe you an apology. At the recently convened meeting of the Board of Directors of World Sailing, the president, Kim Andersen, informed the board that you, in your 18 February 2020 program, mentioned Gary Jobson and myself as the source of information about World Sailing's financial difficulties. And he's confirming about everybody knows they got great financial difficulties. The president further urged Gary and myself to write a letter to you seeking an apology for having mentioned us as the source of the financial information. During the meeting, the president sent both of us a letter which he drafted. I made some corrections to the letter and asked Gary for his comments. Gary very wisely stated at the board meeting that he would only agree to send a letter after he had listened to your program. In any event, the letter was sent to you yesterday with both Gary's and my electronic signatures without either of our permissions. I have now listened to your 18th February program, which, by the way, I found very interesting. It is patently obvious that the Scott you mentioned in the program is Scott McLeod, not Scott Perry. Please accept my apology for the sad confusion. Yours sincerely. From Mr. Scott Perry, who is on the board as a director. So kudos to both of them, to Scott and Gary, for telling the truth and doing the right thing. And I can tell you that Mr. Kim Andersen, chaotic Kim Andersen, obviously is telling his board one thing. And I wonder, Julia, if Kim Andersen, Chris, I wonder if Kim Andersen even looked at the show, or if one of his staffers said, oh, you should have heard Ehman, and he named Jobson and Scott Perry as his sources. Excuse me. This guy is an idiot. And I've said all along he's got a heart of gold, and he must be a nice guy. He's busting his pick for the sport, but I've changed my mind now. When you go and put people's signatures on a letter and send it to somebody when you don't know what the hell you're talking about, and worse than that, the assertions in the letter are completely and utterly false, this guy, I'm sorry to say, is just an idiot. He is chaotic Kim Andersen, if ever there was one. He has 5-ring fever. He wants to be on the Olympic, on the commission, and he's never going to get there because one hears he's held in very low esteem in the IOC because, again, he's telling people one thing, and it turns out not to be true. So I can tell you with respect to the Olympics, the other thing that has happened is that he's been telling the board and the council that he and the former CEO, Mr. Hunt, would go to these IOC meetings and claiming that the IOC wants us to do this and the IOC wants us to do that, including this double-handed mixed-gender keelboat offshore, or get rid of the fin, or have more mixed-gender events. Well, I can tell you at the highest levels of the IOC, we've been telling you this for a year and a half, the IOC is not saying that. The program commission is specifically saying, you guys, as Richard Gladwell has repeatedly reported in sail-world.com, you guys have done a good job with gender equality. It's not perfect. You can do better and keep working on it. But the assertion that they come back and say, well, the IOC wants us to have more mixed gender events is not true at all. They don't want a sport to have 40% of their Olympic events be mixed gender because these knuckleheads think that's the way to squeeze in this class and to squeeze in this offshore keel boat event and this and that. And I'm reliably informed that the IOC Program Commission has not approved as we've told you now for weeks, has not approved the Olympic program proposed by, and it's proposed. In fact, World Sailing now is admitting it's only a proposal. And I can tell you that the IOC Program Commission often does not accept a international federation's proposal for the Olympic program in ensuing years. And sometimes after the Program Commission does get it modified and approve it, then it goes to the full session, as it's called, all the 100-plus members of the IOC, and the session doesn't approve it. Just any of you who know about weightlifting or about baseball or some of these other sports that have been. So this is absolutely idiotic. This guy, as we've been saying, has to go. The election is in November. I hope all of you watching across the world will relate this story or commend this show. I'm not trying to get more views. We'll get thousands of views anyway. But we're trying to do the right thing for the sport and have sane leadership that tells the council, that does not tell stories, fibs, lies to their board or to the council. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It's just astonishing that this guy would do that and then attach, have the staff, presumably he didn't do it himself, have the staff then put signatures on a letter and send it to me. So I've got firsthand knowledge of what is the real problem in world sailing, is that this president comes and says, well, here's the situation. Don't worry, everybody's in favor of this. Here we go. In fact, speaking of which, the EGM, this extraordinary general meeting where they want to change the governance and put all the power into this board, even more power, this 9 or 10 person little board. The Caribbean, the South American, these are the countries, the national authorities. The
Groups.
Well, not groups. The groups, yes, the groups of countries. Thank you, Julia. The Caribbean, the South Americans, the Asians, the Central Europeans have all written strong letters saying we do not want an extraordinary general meeting in May, late April or in May, because it's too expensive for our countries to send delegates. It's too expensive for world sailing that's already well underwater for this quadrennium financially, $2+ million, headed to $3 million by everything I'm hearing. And this governance thing, they've just spent another 30+ thousand, I don't know if it's dollars or pounds, on top of the 300 they've already spent on this proposal. And they should stop. The people on this board, including Gary and Scott and the others who I think are strong leaders and are going to start to figure out now that this guy does not tell them the truth. That is Mr. Andersen. I hope they will park everything. Forget about hiring a CEO. Forget about doing this EGM, this extraordinary general meeting, and changing the governance. Get through the Olympics. We're not even sure if the Olympics is going to happen. Get through your qualifying. They got to deal with the qualifying regattas to get these countries qualified because, with the virus, we don't know if they're going to happen. And then in November, have an election. And if Mr. Andersen gets by the way, he's flying around the world trying to convince heads of national authorities that he's the right guy and spending a lot of money doing that. And he's trying to get rid of delegates on the council, including the 4 whose votes they changed. Remember that whole thing at the Sarasota meeting? They changed their votes a year and a half ago. And we called them out on this. Others have too, Richard Gladwell. The guy has got 5-ring fever. He wants so badly to run this federation and then get recognition, but all he's done is run it into the proverbial ground. He should go. I hope somebody else replaces him, whether it's Gerardo Seeliger, who's a terrific candidate who announced his candidacy on this show, or others who stand. Maybe Mr. Perry will stand, maybe Mr. Jobson, maybe somebody else. But anyone almost anyone would be an improvement over what we have had for these last 4 years. And you can't blame it all on Mr. Hunt, the lately departed non-sailing CEO. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Good.
And Julia's saying good. Good. And Chris is saying good. But I wanted you all to hear that. And there's a lot of comments here. Jay Hanfield, who you must know, Chris is saying, Chris is live from Jamestown. Heaven on earth, but don't tell anyone. Yeah. Does Jay live over there, Chris?
Not in Jamestown. Well, I don't know, actually. I haven't seen each other in a while.
Hanfield, I'm not going to mention all the people are on here because there are so many people on here, and we're seeing all these. Thanks for the thumbs up. Give us the thumbs up. And if you don't agree with us, disagree, and I'll have you on the show and tell us why.
Absolutely.
Jay Hanfield says, I have deep respect for Gary and worked with him for years with the Leukemia Cup regatta, Jay Hanfield saying. And Dick Andersen, did we meet Chris at Harbor Court during the when we were out there for the 12 meters and talking about the Super 12? Were you there, Chris, then?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, Dick Andersen.
I met him and each time in the library of the yacht club, I think, that we both met each other.
Cool.
Which is wonderful. And he's been there, of course, sailing 12s.
Yeah, well, Dick sailed on Columbia. No, on Constellation, on Connie, and when they won the Cup in 1860. 1864.
Good morning.
Right, Dick? 1864. 1964, of course. I always say
on his age.
I always say. Go ahead.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting Dick when I first met him because he's kind of been one of my heroes. So, old and new books on the America's Cup with 12 meters have been. Dick's always been kind of one of those crew members that you keep hearing his name. So he must have been a really important person on those teams.
Well, he was young, but more importantly, perhaps than winning the cup as a crew, is he was a filmmaker and a movie maker and a writer, and he produced, among other things, The Best Defense, the documentary on Ted Turner's and Gary Jobson's '77 Cup defense in Courageous.
Awesome.
What else is going on here? Joshua Bone, that's just passive-aggressive BS. You can't defame world sailing. They'd have to prove how proper they are. Okay, Joshua. Good stuff. A riot, Bill Wingrove saying down in Tampa, Davis Island Yacht Club, a riot is an ugly thing, but it is about time well, that's a serious question, and I was going to make that the question of the day and decided not to. That being whether it's time for a new federation and just for the sailors to go out and form a yacht racing federation nationally, globally, I'm not sure which, but there's plenty of discussion about that very topic at the moment.
But unnecessary.
Well, I'm not in favor of it at the moment, but let's see who else. Don McIntyre is in La Sable in France. Keep up the good fight. Well, thank you, and it's because of all of you and your support and your comments, because people do come on and they read the comments. And if I'm Crutonic, if I'm wrong, tell us, right? Right, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a couple comments on that. A couple things with the IOC. It's not unusual for these presidents and even boards to be saying, this is what IOC is telling us, and that we're going to lose funding if we don't change or make ourselves more broadcast friendly. So it's not just Kim Andersen that has this, situation with the IOC that they're trying to push things in whatever direction that they think is good. When I've interviewed the head of sport and Christophe Duby way back when in the IOC and said, hey, is sailing really at risk of, if we don't change anything, are we really at risk of being chucked from the games? And even the last time I talked to someone last summer, they're very happy. They say that the sailing is the best visuals that they have in the Olympics. I mean, it's really pretty spectacular stuff. And all that they ask is that the sports take advantage of the Olympic platform, like basically everything they have to offer in broadcasting, in media, and anything else that's associated with that, whatever that may be.
Right on. That's exactly right. And it's just, it goes without, we're a core sport, and many people have been saying all along, you don't have to worry about being Olympic, and you don't have to change the sport to try to make it more telegenic.
Right.
Just have cool people on cool boats doing cool racing. And Henry Reese is saying, where is this comment? So the WS letter to you is a forgery. Very sad that he experienced such methods in the good old IWR. No, nobody would do anything like that. But I think your point, Chris, is right, is that the World Sailing Council, the World Sailing Board keeps being told things by Mr. Hunt, and who's gone now, and also Mr. Andersen, saying, oh, this is the gospel according to the IOC. And or Ehman did this. And it's the same thing. It's complete fabrication, and it's sad in many respects.
Well, my understanding of how things work down there, I only went to one World Sailing meeting. I went to that one in Sarasota where they voted for the 2024 slate, or at least that first big vote. And the one thing I've interviewed Kim a couple times. I just met Andy down there, but that I thought they were doing really great things with just coming up with ideas. The governance thing was one of them, and I know that you were saying that the amount of effort and money they put into that, and trying to shoehorn that in a little bit. That may not be the right approach, but that woman that they hired, I think she was a New Zealander named Maria Clark, maybe something like that.
Yes.
Highly intelligent woman, and really eye-opener. Like when she stood up in front of the board and in front of the commission or the council, I think that whether it was Kim Andersen's idea or whoever's idea it was to bring her in, I thought it was an excellent start. Now what they've done with that, you can love or leave in terms of how they've been using that information or trying to get something done. But I will say that was a really inspiring kind of moment, having all these nations, all these really smart, intelligent sailors really paying attention to every word that she said, and really it resonated with all of them. So, it doesn't seem maybe that World Sailing has taken it in the full direction that she recommended. They've used parts of it. Maybe I haven't looked at the whole proposal. But I do believe it was a good start, and I don't think that should be left on the side.
Chris,
yeah,
she's a non-sailor. She's from New Zealand. She's a very bright lady. This is her business. The vice president from New Zealand, Ms. Dawson, Jan Dawson, is the one who brought her in.
Yeah.
They spent £300,000 to do a restructuring that they could have gotten proposals from the IOC, who deal with the 32 federations and know the structure of all the federations, could have gotten the proposal from the IOC for nothing. And there are people within the organization who are also exceedingly bright. Now, I wasn't there to hear it, and I'm sure Maria Clark is terrific. I'm sure she has my favorite expression, Julia. I'm sure she has a heart of gold.
She does.
Yeah.
So
it was inspiring stuff. I'm kind of new to that organization. But the reality is that just like some of the challenges that you're talking about, the type of people that they're electing to their leadership or COO, those challenges they have to figure out, just like you're saying. If you point out some of these problems, there is something structural that could be changed probably.
One can only hope. I'm sure there's things that need to be updated in the structure, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what she's trying to do. And Chris, I strongly argue, and this is my problem with her proposal and what Mr. Andersen's trying to do. These organizations should be bottom up. They're not corporations like General Motors or Microsoft, or they are representative organizations, part a combination of being a Microsoft, but also part being the UN.
Yeah.
And you've got to have bottom up. You've got to have classes and clubs and sailors at the bottom. This has got to be for sailors by sailors, not a secret group of 9 or 10 people sitting in a room in secret, making decisions and dictating down to the sport. I mean, that's completely wrong, and that's what's going on. And worse than that, that's what that governance proposal purports to do, is to centralize all the power in that board of directors. So that's my objection to it. And we'll talk to it offline. But my mother is on.
It's nice to see Torben Grail there. It'd be nice to see more females on the board. I forget his name, but the nice gentleman from France who's a 49er skipper or crew. Those are hardcore sailors, and it'd be nice to see more females on the board too, besides Jen.
Indeed, no question. And those are all good points. And the thing needs good sailors, top-notch sailors. And you probably don't know this, but I'm passionate about it because I led the U.S. delegation to World Sailing for 10 years, and when it was IWRU and ISAF, and served on committees and vice chairs of committee. Let me go back to some comments here, guys. This is John McNeil, the esteemed past president of the International Council of Yacht Clubs, saying some organizations, as they age, become so convoluted and complex as to no longer be able to function. Perhaps WS needs a cathartic. Julia, what do you think of that? You know John McNeil, Commodore McNeil.
I do. I'm sitting here as an organizational consultant with keeping my mouth shut, but
well, your whole life you were doing that. As a headhunter. Okay. What are you drinking? Is that Heineken beer?
Just water, like we talked about. Our kids drink water. I drink water.
Let's
keep the sugar out.
We'll move on here and see if there's any. WS quit worrying about the sailors. Terry Greenfield is saying World Sailing quit worrying about sailors quite a while ago. Andrew Pindar, I mainly sat with representative athletes, and they were all in favor of change. Yes, well, they are, because like a lot of people, they don't understand what the change is all about and what it might do to the organization, Andrew. And I really am people. Andrew's coming on the show too, right, Julia?
Oh yeah,
we've got Andrew booked on when he's here for Sail GP,
right?
I think.
Yeah, no, I mean it does need tuning up, but it was done in a strange way.
And that's fantastic having Andrew just even commenting, because he's been so important to the sport. not just for bringing women into the sport, but sponsoring youth in sport and ocean racing. He seems like the kind of individual, I mean, you guys know him, he was helpful with, who is Moose Sanderson's wife now,
Yeah.
Emma, and a lot of the great women sailors that have come out of Great Britain, and with his Artemis Ocean Racing and Pindar sponsorship. I think people like him almost don't want to. It's almost like why great people don't go into politics. They almost don't want to do that. They just vote with their feet and go get stuff done on their own. So when Andrew wanted to see some change in sport, he sponsored the types of sailors he thought were missing or that needed opportunities. And so sailing has an amazing group of people that are torn, and someone like Andrew would be excellent on a world sailing board or something like that. But he's too busy making change more direct.
Julia?
That's a good point. And in lots of situations, it's much easier to make change that way.
Okay, well, you've got a neighbor of yours, Chris, who's just joined. We say hi to Brad Reed.
Oh, awesome. Yes, he sent me a note today.
You want to say anything to him?
Well, no, I'll just let Brad know you're across the bridge. But yeah, we'll be talking about those initiatives, kind of different exit, what did he call it? Exit routes or something like that. But just coming out of junior sailing, giving more options to kids. I know I sat on a big boat with a bunch of high schoolers last summer and one afternoon, and their first time on a big boat. And I think I realized that they would have never have gotten that opportunity if Brad hadn't put together a bunch of kids just to jump on a big cruising boat and go for a spin around the bay. And they almost were like wondering what they should do with themselves once we were sailing in a straight line across the bay. And I said, relax, lay back, have a conversation.
No, that's a good point. And of course, Brad, for those of you who don't know him, he is celebrated. He has done a terrific job as executive director of Sail Newport, of which I'm proudly a founding member back in 1983 with Dr. Robin Wallace and a few others. And Brad's must have been doing that for, 14, 15 years now. It's a great community sailing program.
That's excellent.
In Newport, Rhode Island, over there at Fort Adams. Let me just see. Gerardo Seeliger, speaking of Gerardo, is on. And Ben Ramacher, who's also a senior serious guy in world sailing now. He's saying that you're referring to Jan Rochereau, who is the head of the Athletes Commission. John Emmett is also saying that that's who you mean. Okay, there's some other comments here. I'm not going to go through them all. Julie, anything else we need? Oh, here's Jay Hanfield. Says Brad Reed, and I would support this. Brad Reed for World Sailing President.
For president.
or CEO. And, I don't think they'll ever take an American. I don't think they'll ever take somebody outside of Europe. And by the way, David Abercrombie, who is the CEO of New Zealand Yachting, or whatever they call themselves now, he has been put forward as a possible candidate. Phil Jones, who was head of Australian sailing, I can't remember, everybody's changed their name. Yeah. He was here on our show not too long ago, sitting there in the hot seat over there next to Julia, where we do in-studio guests. But now Brad he doesn't want to leave Newport. He wants to play hockey, right? Do you ever play hockey with those guys? You're not a hockey player, Chris?
No, I have a friend who's played hockey with them, and they're all excellent. They play with Jerry Kirby and Scott Ferguson and all these really great Newporters. I think the most important thing that those guys do is they coach, particularly Brad with the Newport Whalers, I think it is, with Dave Moffat and all these great kind of sailors. I'm telling you all male names, but their kids play co-ed. Growing up in Newport, and Brad's been a leading coach. Brad and Kenny are really hockey players. They'll keep telling you that, which they are from birth. So as they get older, I think hockey becomes just as important as sailing, getting back into it. But Brad, again, just like Andrew Pindar, Brad's too busy making real, not really change, but just a real impact on the sailing communities in our state, and being a model for other community boating in the United States. So don't promote anyone like that. They're too busy doing great things, making real things happen.
He's added to that because Brad just said, "I like my job!"
Exclamation point. I like my job. And Vincent McAteer is saying Brad and Joe are doing a tremendous job driving opportunity in Rhody, meaning Rhode Island True Leaders. Okay, let's move on. Thank you to all of you who joined us for this show. We've got with us, I haven't put your title up here, in Jamestown, Rhode Island, and Chris Musler who is a journalist and an author and a father and a lifelong sailor, a nearly lifelong sailor. We're delighted, Chris, to have you with us. Let's go on now with our next segment, a very popular segment, This Day in History. And do you all know what happened on this day in history of 2005?
2005.
I'll give you a clue.
Oh, Steve Fossett.
Well done. Keep going.
Did he try to hot air balloon around the world?
Not in 2005. He'd already done that.
Okay.
But you're close. Carry on. Maybe
Yeah.
Mark Mills knows. He's joined Tom Dugan, maybe.
Yeah.
Carry on. Julia?
Well, yeah, Julia.
Any
what do you
idea?
say?
I don't know.
Okay, here's another hint.
That's a blast from the past.
James Stephen Fossett, born in 1944 and died tragically in 1907, was an American businessman and a record-setting aviator, sailor, and adventurer. He was the first person to fly solo nonstop around the world in a balloon and in a fixed-wing aircraft.
Oh, okay.
He made his fortune in the financial services industry, the commodities market in Chicago, from memory. Was best known for many world records, including 5 nonstop circumnavigations of the Earth.
Yes.
As a long-distance solo balloonist, as a sailor, and as a solo flight fixed-wing aircraft pilot. Now, I ask you again, what happened 2005 on this day?
Wow.
Here's another hint.
Oh, yeah. That was Chuck Yeager was part of that program, wasn't he?
Keep going. Well done. Burt Rutan was, anyway. I don't know if Yeager was.
Burt Rutan, yeah. Sorry.
The Scaled Composites Model 311 Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer, and of course Branson was involved in sponsoring it, is an aircraft designed by Burt Rutan out in the desert, east of San Diego and L.A., in which Steve Fossett first flew a solo nonstop airplane flight around the world in slightly more than 67 hours. The flight speed of 551 kilometers per hour set the world record for the fastest nonstop, non-fueled flight, and that happened on this day.
Oh, wow.
In 2005 that he completed that solo nonstop flight.
I actually have a Steve Fossett story, strangely enough.
Well, hang on, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because, wait, there's more. There's more. You know this boat?
Yeah.
Scaled Composites that built that plane for Mr. Fossett also built the wing on Stars and Stripes 88, the first wing to be used in the America's Cup. And one of the, there were some wings on Sea Cats and a few other things, but there is, back that lower third off, there's the big boat in the background, and Dennis Conner with one of two, the 60-foot catamarans. And the wing on Stars and Stripes 88 was also built out there in the desert at Scaled Composites by Mr. Burt Rutan. Speaking of cool. Mr. Fossett, of course, he broke a lot of records on Cheyenne. Cheyenne was the former PlayStation, and he was one of sailing's most prolific distance record holders. Speed sailing was his specialty from, I didn't realize it was this long, 93 to 2004.
Right.
And I'll leave that up. A lot of you will know his tremendous achievements in offshore record sailing. And here's the list. 13 outright world records. I won't read them all, but just an amazing gentleman.
Incredible.
An incredible sailor, and obviously aeronaut. Well, no, a ballooner and a pilot. Would you call him an aeronaut? Okay.
Yeah, there's a movie about that right now. I think it's called The Aeronauts.
And
good. Yeah.
Labor Day 2007, tragically, he took off for just a flight. He was only going to go 6 hours. I don't know, go have lunch someplace. He took off in a light aircraft from out in the desert in Nevada and never came back. And they finally found the wreckage, and it's a little gruesome, but they did finally find the wreckage and not much of him. But they did ID him, what was left of him in the wreck. So he was lost tragically in 2007, Mr. Steve Fossett. So that's this day in history. And your story?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really simple one. One of my first jobs out of college, which I didn't excel at near the end, I think I got fired.
Old Dominion University was where you went to school?
Old Dominion University, yep. And besides working at Sailing World out of college, I went and worked as the public relations manager for U.S. Sailing at a very young age, probably too young for me. But it was great. It was a great opportunity. I edited Dave Perry's Racing Rules of Sailing when they made the big overhaul of that. That was a wonderful book project and lifelong friend. But I was collecting the recommendations for the Rolex Yachtsman and Yachtswoman of the Year, and Steve Fossett called me and just, asked me just some questions and like, where can people send things? And he wasn't necessarily advocating for himself, but people were asking him what they should do. And so we had a nice conversation about that. I was looking at those records and trying to figure out what record in 96, 97 would have been making him eligible. Maybe it was just cumulative or something like that. Might have been that Pacific Ocean east to west. I don't know. But anyway, but he was on the list to be nominated for Rolex Yachtsman of the Year around that time.
Cool.
It seemed like a really nice guy. I mean, we'd obviously looked up to him and saw his name all over the place. So as kids looking in the magazines, he was a hero.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Well, one other little bit of historical note. This is an interesting week in America's Cup history. On the 2nd, on yesterday, Dinghy won the Cup of 2003, the March 2nd of 2003. Dinghy won the Cup from Team New Zealand, and of course BMW Oracle became the challenger of record for 07. On the 3rd of March, and not today, in March in 1990, the first IACC yacht was launched, and it was not ITA-1, which a lot of people thought it was the Italian, the first Il Moro di Venezia. It was actually Le Défi Francais, because they had sail number 2, but they actually splashed before Il Moro did, and then that fantastic ceremony in Venice. Wow. And that class just started. That is what? 30 years ago, and that seems like yesterday to some of us, but that class then went on to serve the Cup very well, and 101 boats were actually built. 100 splashed, but one of them didn't quite make it to the water. And on Thursday this week, one Australia sank in 1995 during the Louis Vuitton Cup off of San Diego, off of Point Loma, and maybe I'll drag that video up. Have you seen that video, Chris?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's
And
incredible.
it was void. I'll show it on the show on Friday.
Terrifying, actually, if you think about it. Made you think that on those kind of boats, on a lot of modern racing boats. I mean, maybe the racers don't think this way, but myself as a journalist who hops on these boats, I'm worrying about that constantly. And the fact that you have this video to remind you of it makes you realize that professional sailors are always just so close, women and men, to something breaking and getting injured, as we knew with Bart in 2012.
Absolutely. And someday I'll tell a story about being in boots full of water down below in Dennis Connor's boat, bucketing the thing out because we thought it was about to sink. In any event, that was today. That's actually this week in America's Cup history. Thanks to Hamish Ross for sending that along. But let's get into more interesting things like you, Chris. Tell us about your background. I mean, you sail a wide range of boats. You obviously sail collegiately at ODU at Old Dominion University, but
yes.
Of late you've been a Moss sailor.
Yeah, I think Moss sailing and right before that, A-class catamaran sailing were the first kind of my own personal sailing in a good almost 20 years since leaving college. And so that the Moss sailing went away about a year and a half ago or something like that. But I put a year into ACATS and then put 2 years into Moss sailing, and that was excellent. I lived right on the water. I would put the kids to bed when they were younger at 7 o'clock at night and still get 2 hours of sailing in. But for me, I'm very lucky. I'm usually in the 140-pound range, and I can fit on a lot of different types of boats. And I grew up starting big boat sailing and then sailing penguins, and frostbiting in New York and cruising with my family. So I've been very fortunate to have a really diverse sailing career right off the bat. Actually, when I went to Old Dominion, I didn't know how to roll tack at all because I had sailed a 470 campaign for the 92 trials. And so I was very fast, but my boat handling was horrible. So I had a crew, Amy Warner, who was from Tabor Academy, and I couldn't have asked for anyone better to introduce me to college sailing.
Tell us about these shots.
Yeah, so back to the diversity. I've been very fortunate to be the media person, one of the media team members for the Bermuda race since 2010, I think it was. And so I'm challenged to sail on different boats. And one year, 2012, I sailed in the double-handed division on a class 40. And that year, I also sailed the Atlantic Cup, which is going on this spring from Charleston to New York and then to Maine, to Portland, Maine, I think. So I'm really into double-handed, it's not really single-handed, but double-handed and short-handed sailing. So I'm really interested in these boats. This is the Figaro 3, which is the new boat. You know, the Figaro, Solitaire de Figaro in France is basically a spring series up and down the coast of France. You know, a couple 100-mile races, some even shorter, but, you know, 45 boats racing. So double-handed sailing is something I write about, and single-handed sailing for the New York Times. I think it's a really important discipline. I think it's one of the most ones that people can connect with the most. And so that was me last year testing out the Figaro 3 on one of the first ones that came to the United States. And, you know, who knows if that, you know, if the Olympic mixed offshore will come to be or not, if that's one of the front runners or not. These boats are very, you know, they're not crazy expensive, but they're expensive if you want to have an Olympic campaign.
Well,
but I really enjoy sailing boats that are built for purpose. And that boat is built for one person, particularly to sail long distance. And to me, that spells freedom. I think these kind of boats are very cool.
They're crazy expensive for the size, but and complex. Size. And the boats that are being looked at, and Luca, I think is on here too, but the L30, is being considered. It's being used in this world sail, if it happens, this world sailing offshore double-handed.
The Europeans last fall in October were the first kind of ever really certified mixed offshore event, and Luca's boats were there, and they had some glitchy problems, but it's just fantastic that they did that. Whether or not this becomes an Olympic class officially or not, who knows? But
well, it's not going to be an Olympic class because they've already, if that event happens, and I have my doubts it will, but it will be a non-foiling boat. That's in the spec. So a lot of us thought that this was going to be the boat, and a lot of us thought that this might even be what the America's Cup 2021 boat looks like. There'd be a semi-foiler monohull like this kind of a boat, but that's not.
I would say, you know, when I looked at that criteria and stuff, I think they need to explain that a little bit more, because this is a foil assist boat. It doesn't come fully out of the water. So I don't know if you know any better than I do, but I'm curious to see if foil assist means foiling or if the boat can go clearly out of the water, you know?
Okay.
Who knows?
Okay. Well, thanks for that. But now tell us about this boat. It's rather different.
Well, like I said, I've been very fortunate in my life. My parents didn't start out as sailors. They're from New York City. But my mom learned to sail in the Pacific Northwest at college, and convinced my dad to do it. And so cruising was really a big part of our lives. Racing was non-existent for a long time. So we've just, you know, all three members of our family, I have a twin sister and an older brother, and we all cruise. My sister on a motorboat, my brother on a same kind of boat we grew up on. And we have a cold molded schooner from 1993. It's kind of been our third cruising boat and probably hopefully our last one. But it's really important to our kids. Our kids actually don't really race. They haven't really ever raced, but I would like them to be interested in that, but it's not on the radar screen. But right now the way that we can spend time together as a family and still me get my kick sailing and my wife, is to be just kind of living on a sailboat in the summers and going places. And we took the boat to the Bahamas. I wrote about that. We took the boat to Maine. My wife is actually in the Athletic Hall of Fame at the College of Charleston, but shortly after graduating college, she was just burnt out. She was at St. Pete High School. They won high school nationals all 4 years, I believe, when she was there. And so this was the only way I can get my wife to go sailing. But
what is the boat called? It's called Magic, of course, which is named after, I think, the first, as a New York Yacht Club's American Magic is named after America, the boat that won the Cup, obviously, in 1851, and then Magic, which was New York Yacht Club's first Defender in 1870, hence New York Yacht Club American Magic, the name of the team. Yes. And this boat is named Magic. You said also named after. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think that it's a little bit of maybe a little hippy dippy California kind of stuff too, because it's just so magical. But
Hippy dippy.
Yeah. But Craig and I'm from the Northeast.
What kind of people do you think we are out here?
Hippy
But
dippy, I know.
Craig and Vicky Johnson, who designed the boat and had it built by Eric Jesperson and his dad Bent up in Canada, they are heavily influenced by Lyle Hess, who's an awesome, well-known Californian designer who designed all Lynn and Larry Party's boats, Taliesin and Seraphin. And also he's influenced by George Steers, who designed America and probably had something to do with Magic, that next Defender.
He did indeed, and I think
so. There's a tie-in right there with this schooner.
I think Dick Andersen is still on here as well. So I had a close-up of the boat at one point, and it says Magic, and then the port of call, or the home port, is Sausalito, and still why is Sausalito presumably across the bay here?
Well, there's something really cool about that because, if you've ever read Sterling Hayden's Wanderer book about him just blazing out on his schooner, taking his children illegally,
Exactly.
sailing out to the islands. Oh, it's an awesome book.
You read that, Julia?
Oh, yes.
Terrific.
But there's that. Yeah, he talked about the schooners coming in and out of Sausalito of days past, and then in the 20s and 30s. When he had and 40s, 50s even, when he had his boat down there. So there's something just dreamy about schooners and old ships coming into, San Francisco Bay and coming into Sausalito. So to change the hailing port, I think I'll get a pass on not, sanding down layers of varnish and trying to match the patina of the name to the hailing port. I just kind of like it. Maybe someday we'll get back there.
Yeah, it's much more romantic.
Yeah,
you said that in that book they talked about nude sailing, Julia?
Nude sailing.
Did you say that?
No, I said I knew the skipper.
Oh, you knew the skipper.
Spike Africa.
I was fantasizing here about nude sailing, and I thought, God, Julia is kinkier than I thought. She must have done some nude sailing.
I'm sure there's plenty of nudity on schooners in the middle of the Pacific.
It's NOOD.
NOOD. Well, that's the National One Design Offshore One Design.
You're right.
Okay, gang, we'll get serious here again. Let's look at a video, Chris, that you did. Set this up for us before I play it.
Yeah, you mentioned Ben Remacher, who's one of the presidents of the 49er FX class.
Class manager for the FX, for the 49er and the FX, and for the NACR 17.
Right, and along with Marcus Spillane, who's a teammate of his in terms of organizing those classes. So they run their own media, and along with SAP software and Sail Tracker. And I called up Ben out of the blue, and I just asked him, if there was an opportunity for us to work together. I saw some elements that could be either enhanced or added to their live coverage of the Worlds in Auckland that Sky Sports did. And I wanted to test out some ideas that I've had for broadcasting for sailing for a long time. I've even shared them with NBC Sports before the 2013 America's Cup. And luckily, I flew down there and had the opportunity to create a daily show, help out with commentary, create some storylines for the commentary and the walks in the park or the dock walks. And so if you look at 49er.org and all over their Facebook and social media, you'll see the fruits of all of our labor down there, because we've tried to do a more sailor-centric, human interest approach to covering the sport. Well,
I won't play the whole video because I can't remember, 5 or 6 minutes long, but let's have a look at it because it gives an example of one of the things that you have brought to this. This was just a couple of weeks ago down in Geelong, right?
Yeah,
Royal
just 2 weeks
Geelong
in Port Phillip Bay across from Melbourne.
Yeah, and this is what we've been doing for the Gov Cup, and other regattas are doing it. So I encourage you to have a look at this, and let's talk about afterwards if you think this is a good idea or not. It would help if I start the video.
Yeah, this is just one of our daily shows. Welcome back to Geelong and the Daily Show.
I'm going to take you off it for a sec.
Hayley Outteridge, who are currently leading the NACR fleet, but they've been doing really well all week, really consistent. But we're not here to talk about the racing, at least at the moment. We're here to talk about just kind of coming back from adversity and what injuries. We talked about injuries in these high performance classes, but this isn't even about that.
One thing that I didn't know when I came into this regatta, and I've been covering Nathan for a long time since your entry into the America's Cup, that a bunch of years ago, before his first Olympics, he got in a really bad car accident. And obviously he's here and he's had tremendous successes, some of the top successes you can ever have as a sailor on this planet. So I just want to talk to Nathan and Hayley about that and see what happens, when you recover from a really bad accident. So maybe just, tell me what happened.
Oh, it was very simple. I fell asleep when I was driving a car. I was actually coming down to Melbourne from Sydney for an event and got about halfway down and middle of the day fell asleep. Car went off the road and ran straight into a tree. And I woke up with the steering wheel like pushed up right in front of me, windscreen all smashed in. And there was someone there cutting the door off the car saying, "Don't move, we'll get you out and you'll be okay." And I got taken to a local hospital where they did a bunch of different x-rays and turned out I had a fracture in my lumbar spine. So L3 in the lumbar spine had a burst fracture, and so I got flown back to Sydney where I had to wait 2 or 3 days before surgery could happen. And after 9 or 10 hours of surgery, they replaced that vertebra and fused it above and below, and spent another month or so in hospital. And it was 15 years ago. It was a long time ago now.
And Hayley, Bo told me that story. He said you and Bo, your brother who's here, doing media for the Australian sailing team, you were sitting in the emergency room and it just wasn't looking good.
Yeah, we were actually doing a regatta ourselves at the time, and so we were on the water when we found out. We knew Nathan was driving to Melbourne for his first 49er event, and our parents had to leave straight away, so Bo and I crossed the finish line, and then we were told. So from then on we finished the event, but we were quite young, being looked after by our grandparents, and eventually we ended up just beside the bed for about a month in Sydney.
Every day.
Okay, so I'm going to, Chris, take us out of that. I'll leave it running. Yeah. But this is an example of what you're doing with a daily show. Were you doing that you're doing that in the afternoon, weren't you, after racing?
What I basically did is I came up with a story list. You know how you have in broadcasting, you have that rundown of everything you're doing for every minute. And what I did is I took the daily coverage and inserted concepts and storylines and interviews for the next day's work. And so we did that. I mean, we had full lists of people who we wanted to talk to, what we wanted to talk to them about. As the regatta evolved, we came up with ideas for people we wanted to talk to involved in the racing and what stages they were in terms of their, country or team selection. And then what I did is I contact through WhatsApp all the sailors that we wanted to talk to the next day, and I just coordinated their time and their schedule. And obviously, it's a moving target, both with the regatta schedule, but also with their temperament. And that's one thing you and I wanted to talk about in terms of media training and access to sailors and what kind of things you're used to talking about. We wanted to talk about a lot of things that you haven't heard a lot, when you talk about sailboat regattas, and actually some pretty personal questions too, in terms of preparation or rivalries.
No, exactly. You want to talk about cool people and what makes them cool. And I'd never heard this story about Nathan having his problem with L3, and I've had 2 major back operations, so I have some empathy and knowledge about that. But then have fusions above and below, that's serious stuff. And of course, their brother, this is Nathan and Hayley,
right?
Who have been sailing, competing for an Olympic berth, and you're going to have some news on that for us in a moment. Yeah. But their brother, Bo Outteridge, is a world-class photographer and videographer. He's doing a lot of cool work, right?
Yeah, he is really excellent. In a lot of ways, his work is, he's doing work for the Australian sailing team, and they need certain things, certain deliverables in terms of video and audio coming out of the sailors each regatta. And I think the awesome thing, or the thing that I would like to see more of with someone like Bo, is a little bit more freedom. And that's what Ben Remacher gave me and the media team, in a couple weeks ago, is we had an entire week to do almost whatever we wanted. And we had a live broadcast team to help us do that. And so we were able to, whatever we can dream of, basically, in terms of talking to people who were relevant, during a live broadcast or after sailing or the next day. We had that freedom, and someone like Bo is so much fun and so in tune with the sailors. But because, and I have this problem too, when you know the sailors so well, you almost shy away from talking about some really interesting stuff, or you almost don't even see the really great story right in front of your face. And I think Bo, I'd love to see him have more freedom and him to convince himself that he has some better insight into the sailors and use it.
Let's talk about technically how you did it, because people on here are watching, looking for ideas and tips about how to run regattas, how to promote regattas, and the sport in general. And
Right.
we have found at Balboa Yacht Club for the Governor's Cup that doing, as you know, we do a daily morning show. We specifically do it in the morning.
Yes.
And in the morning, we review what had happened the day before, but then we're always looking forward, because we find our viewers who are watching around the world, a lot of them are parents and grandparents of the kids that are racing in Gov Cup, the International Youth Match Racing Championship that has been going on for almost 60 years down at Balboa Yacht Club. But we find doing a morning show and interviewing a couple people and maybe an official, and then getting out on the water and going live. We've done that. But technically, how are you doing this? Is this a single camera shot? Is it an iPhone or a?
Yeah, this is a really nice SLR, and obviously we didn't have a ton of resources in some instances. Like here, we should all have lapel mics to cut down the audio, because if you look behind us, there's live tracking going on of the race with a loud speaker. So we had a really hard time in a small venue getting a quiet place.
But
so
you're shooting it with an SLR on a tripod, and audio. One of the things we learned early on with this is that if you don't have good audio, people turn off.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could have.
We were really worried about that one.
You could have sort of not crummy, but you can have video. Sometimes the AV sync, which right now doesn't look like it's perfect, but you can have some other video problems. But if the audio is at all problematic, people leave, and I don't.
I agree 100%. If you're running a regatta and you're doing even if it's Facebook Live or something like that, I'm the worst offender on this. With a great, a good smartphone, you can have one of those handheld gyroscope holders for the phone to keep it steadier, because that's a problem that I have, and also have an external mic. Make sure you check that it works really well with a dead cat for outside stuff as well. And that can take you a really long way. So you have a stable image where the audio is great, but you have to crush the audio. And even with us, with a real pro crew, we had issues with it. There was some stuff we had to scrap because there was a baby crying in the background. No offense to babies, but we were limited in terms of the number of microphones, and that was a problem.
Yeah, well, you got to have a mixer. You're right. The audio is. I keep saying this, but somehow we're going to do some kind of a forum or seminar or something on this live streaming thing and compare and contrast what people are doing and learn from each other. Yeah. You were streaming this to Facebook, only to Facebook?
The daily shows were filmed separately on the SLR, and then we were doing live Facebook Live with a smartphone for our dock walks, if you want to call it that. And we called it a walk in the park that was sponsored by Forward Whip, and so those were live, and then the other live broadcasts were done through Sail Tracks with the SAP software, with a full broadcasting team on site. And, I actually don't know the technology that's putting it on all their different platforms, but we had a broadcast team with a booth and, and all the different screens that they have.
So this was taped on the DSLR. You recorded this on the DSLR and then uploaded it later.
Correct. All the daily shows, that's what they did. And he just literally just put a sticker on it. We wanted to do it all in one shot. We didn't have time to do a lot of editing, so we just crushed them and then put the lead in on it and sent it off.
Cool. Here's Julia's got a point.
Yeah, Ben Rummacher has just posted. Here's the playlist of daily shows if people want to see some of Chris's work last week, and he gives the URL. So it's
that's on YouTube. So you actually uploaded them to YouTube as well.
Right.
which we are doing now here. We're Chris, as you probably know, we do the show live to Facebook, and we're looking at whether we start to simulcast it to YouTube as well.
Yeah.
Which costs money and it takes time and energy. But we are now, just for those of you watching or watching in replay, you can watch it also in replay, not live, but in replay on our YouTube Sailing Illustrated TV. Just Google TFE Live and it'll come up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's cool. You're doing, besides, you're still stringing for the New York Times, right?
Yeah, we don't, for those articles, I have a kind of a counterpart there, a colleague, Christopher Clary, who really does cover like the Volvo and the America's Cup, which I write about both of those things as well. But he was there when Herb McCormick stopped writing, from Cruising World, and a great author. When he stopped, Chris Clary took over. Chris is one of their literally top, journalists at the New York Times for sports. If you see anything on Wimbledon or any of the great tennis or golf events, he's the guy.
Chris is a longtime dear friend. He is from San Diego and has covered the Cup, and as you said, tennis as well. And he used to be the head sports writer just for the IHT, the International Herald Tribune, which of course New York Times owns.
Right.
And we get together often, especially if we're both in San Diego. But great guy, Chris Clary. We should get Chris on the show.
He's excellent. I mean,
he's a terrific guy, as you say.
It's a tribute to it's a tribute to him. But we're very lucky as a sport to have such a high caliber journalist, like you were talking to Bernie Wilson. To have such high caliber journalists that write about so many other things on such a high level, to cover our sport, that kind of insight is wonderful. And that's one of the things that he's taught me, and my other editors have taught me, that writing for a general audience, you have to bring them into something besides just that sport. And for me, I've always taken that to heart, because it just doesn't happen in a magazine, in a periodical like the New York Times, unless you're bringing in an audience in a way that that you kind of bring them straight in. And you're not doing that by talking to them about how tennis works or how sailing works. You have to bring them into something that they can connect with.
No, that's right. And Bernie Wilson is obviously top notch. And by the way, Richard Gladwell, who is on here,
so is Bernie Wilson.
Is Bernie on? Mm-hmm. Oh, good. Richard Gladwell is now talking about guys who are good writers but also know the sport. Is now writing as they would say down under or in the UK, fortnightly, on a fortnight every 2 weeks. He's writing a piece, and I think this coming weekend he'll have a piece again in the New Zealand Herald on the America's Cup.
I heard about that. That's excellent. It's so good that he's doing that.
And one of his pictures, he's also a good photographer, so it's nice to see a sailor going back, as you're doing for the New York Times, and Herb McCormick used to do, seeing a sailor going back now in the mainstream media, of course, because of the interest in the Cup. But let me go back to this photo, which I teased a minute ago.
Yes.
What is the status of Nathan and Hayley? Because they were in the hunt for the Olympic berth in the NACRA class, and you have news on that.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if I saw it through a Richard Gladwell post or, but no, I haven't seen anything directly out of Sport Australia, but but it looks like Jason Waterhouse and Lisa Darmanin, who were third at the Worlds, Nathan and Hayley were second, as silver medalists, and this picture is from that event that we were at 2 weeks ago. But I think Jason Waterhouse, silver medalist, and Lisa Darmanin from Rio are their pick. And I talked to John Bertrand, Australian John Bertrand, when I was down there right near the end of the event. I don't think he's a selector anymore, but we talked about that, and he said this is going to, no matter what, it was going to be a really difficult selection. And I think the way things
one hears there might be a challenge to that selection.
Yeah, I saw that note too.
An appeal, and I don't understand the Australian system here in the U.S. By law. The Amateur Sports Act and the USOC it has to be objective. It can't be us. You can't have a committee of selectors, which apparently they do in Australia, right?
Right, absolutely. And I learned a lot about country selection. People were a little closed-lipped about the different countries, and there are some that the New Zealand, the criteria is really definitive, but they won't share it with the rest of the world because they don't want anyone to interfere with how they're selecting. And Italy, their selection was just we'll call you, just keep winning every regatta and we'll call you when we're ready.
Don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah, and I interviewed those sailors about that, both of them from the Italian team. We talked to the Americans a little bit about it. We should have talked to the Americans more based on how it turned out, just to learn more about it. But in this particular case, John Bertrand, who's a wonderful guy, he just knew it was going to be very difficult. And I don't even know if Nathan and Hayley, what the difference would be if they actually won the world championship instead of getting second, regardless of where Jason and Lisa finished, if that was going to be enough for the selectors, considering that I think they lost out to them at the Worlds in New Zealand, which happened to be just like 3 months beforehand.
Yeah, not even.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously I interviewed both of them right after they came off the water, and they were really disheartened. I mean, they knew they had beaten them, but they had lost the world championship. They literally lost it. And they said, Nathan said, this is probably going to be the last time you're going to see me in a NACRA 17 and probably in the Olympic game, in an Olympic class. And so that's a big deal. I mean, they literally called, when we were talking about 49ers, and that's another thing. We did a series on the 20th anniversary of the 49er in the Olympics in Sydney. And everyone called it the Outteridge years, when he came into the 49er class, which he talked about about his back injury about 2008.
Well, we're all getting old.
Yeah.
Even Nathan and not so much Hayley.
Yeah.
And what are you told me when we did the tech check yesterday, what, are you 45-ish?
Yeah, I'm 45 years old. I have a September birthday.
Good.
So I'll be 45 for the rest of the year. I'm not crazy old, but the one thing I've realized is I see people older than me sailing, foiling. I have a kite foil board for kiting, which I need to get into, and I just see a lot of people older than me doing really great things. So I like being inspired by that.
Well, one hopes. Hopefully you're going to do TFE live when I'm long gone, and it'll be Chris Musler live. We're speaking, if those of you who don't know.
You're not that old, Tom.
Well, I am. I'm there. I don't want to see that one. I want to see that one. In Jamestown, Rhode Island, there, in beautiful Jamestown, Rhode Island, across the bay from Newport, we have Chris Musler with us, who is a journalist and author and father and lifelong yacht racer. And he's starting to do broadcasting, doing some live streaming and so on, which we think is really cool. So it's nice to have you on the show. I hope you can stay.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention to you, remember that topic that we had mentioned about, what was it, explaining the sport to any audience?
Yeah, to non-sailors, but also to sailors. Yeah, you were going to make some points on that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, writing for the New York Times, we have to figure out ways to make it interesting. I've done my job right for a general interest piece about sailing. If Tom, you know a lot about the sport, you know a lot of people in the sport. If you or anyone else involved in the sport learns something new, is interested in the article, and the same thing happens for a non-sailor. So the goal is to take something quite complex and boil it down, whether it's complex about a person or about an event or technology or whatever that is. And I see challenges in the way our sport is presented, mostly online now. The writers that I just mentioned to you that write for mainstream publications, they're excellent, and they can present the sport interesting for all of us. But the challenge that we have in broadcasting with SailGP, with the America's Cup, with the Volvo Ocean Race, is the broadcasting companies don't know what they don't know, right? So they come to event organizers and often excellent sailors, the best sailors in the world, and say, what do we need to know? Tell us about this sport. And those individuals who, whether it be through Sunset and Vine or through the broadcast company that I was just working with, or through NBC Sports or the Olympic Broadcasting Company, they say, okay, yeah, we'll tell you how the sport works. And then we use digital overlays to tell you how it works. And the problem is that even though, yes, you have to do quite a bit of that in our sport, I believe that you don't have access to the audience for very long if you don't have some characters for them to invest in. So my approach is to try to work.
Slow down and say that again.
I think the challenge of maintaining a viewer is that if they don't have a character to invest in, you kind of lose them.
Julia, write that down. I love that. If you don't have a character, meaning a person, a human being, a personality, to invest in, you're going to lose them. And I could not agree with you more, Chris. Carry on.
It's hard.
Carry on, please.
It's hard because, you know, what the sport is doing really well at, and I know we were talking about Kim Andersen before, but whatever his initiatives have been with the Sailing World Cup, regardless of what you think about that, the sport is being presented in a much better way technically. So Ken Reed and any other, Peter Lester, any other really great announcers have a lot of tools at their disposal. And God, when you finally have someone interested enough to watch an entire race and invested in the characters, then you have the material and the tools for them to learn even more and raise their level of understanding. That's our goal, to get people's level of understanding. And that's in all sport with the digital overlays and all that stuff. But we don't, we have to try to figure out how to squeeze in these stories beforehand, during, and after, so they understand who these sailors are and what their backgrounds are. And one thing I took away from almost every regatta that I've watched is, you know, 2013 was a good example. That was a great story. You know, like just, it didn't matter.
You're talking about the 2013 Cup because of the comeback.
It was a great story, but I have to tell you that I knew no more about James Spithill from before I started watching that to when I finished starting watching that.
That's a fair point.
And I don't want to like give everyone a hard time because they put so much effort into creating something that is really wonderful right now in terms of how the sport is presented visually and how it's explained. And I just think that there should be, and I'm biased, but a journalistic overlay of the coverage of the sport to better develop the sailors. And a term that I came up with a young 49er sailor, Nate Hausberg, was that we media trained the stories right out of sailing. So if you have a mainstream journalist coming to an athlete in the mixing zone, for example, at the America's Cup, they don't know what to ask the sailor. So they're going to ask the sailor some question. The sailor's going to answer that question. But the interviewer doesn't know a lot about the sport. So they're going to ask questions to learn more about the sport. So their level of understanding is low. So you're missing opportunities to learn more about the athlete and their process and how they're doing.
Another really good point, and that is that it's PR 101 or it's communications 101. Don't answer the question you're asked. Tell the media, tell the audience what you want to tell them.
Right.
Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. And it's the same thing. Somebody can ask me, "Hey, did the sun come up in the east this morning?" When I want to tell them that Julia is a wonderful coordinating producer and host, and they'll say, well, "The sun." I don't know if it came up, but I can tell you that Julia is a wonderful co-host and producer, and you know, that's what you've got to. You're right. So there's another good point. We got to tell the sailors. We got to media train the sailors
in a different way. I think
to help promote the sport. And we have to focus on people and nationalities. I mean, that's why you see whenever I write anything, put it on Sailing Illustrated. And I now see a lot of other people doing it, including World Sailing and U.S. I always put parenthesis USA, parenthesis CAN, parenthesis GBR, AUS, so that people get some idea. And we spend way too much frigging time talking about the weather. If I had a nickel for every press release that came out, and the first sentence is, "It was a dark and stormy night," or the equivalent of it. You know, today's racing was delayed because of this, and the wind was that, and then it shifted here, and it was a very tricky condition. And then you get a quote from the race officer, then you get a quote from the coach. I don't want to hear that. I want to know at the end of today's racing, Outteridge and Hayley, Nathan and Hayley, who are competing for the top for their Olympic berth, finished thus and such, period. And simple declarative sentences, as I've learned from Bernie Wilson and my mother and others, Julia. Simple declarative sentence talking about the results and the sailor. Who cares about the freaking weather? No one will remember that it was particularly shifty or rough or this or that unless you know, Australia sinks. In 30 years ago this coming Thursday, and that was quite a dramatic moment. That's a horse of a different color. And as Dick Andersen, who's on here, said, that was one of the scariest, if not the scariest things anyone can experience. John Sangmeister, when they sank, when OEX sank out from underneath them in the way to Hawaii this year and the last year in the Transpac race. But why? Can you tell me why in the world do yacht clubs in class, not Talbot Wilson, not Bernie Wilson. I mean, these guys. I hope you don't write stories that start "It was a dark and stormy night."
No,
Press
well,
releases, or you. I know you don't. I'm teasing you.
Well, you know, to be honest with you, I told you that I worked for U.S. Sailing, and one of the reasons why that relationship ended poorly was because I was a little too hot under the collar. I didn't want to do press releases, and I eventually found my way to doing what I should be doing, what I love doing, but I just couldn't do it because the formats that I was being given and suggested I just didn't like. Now, that's not to say you can't just like go off and write a New Yorker story, you know, for each press release.
That's a good point.
But you know, you can definitely do a little bit better. Just pick some cool angle, like that moment of the day, and just start with the moment, and then you can you can give all the details later.
You know what Formula One does, and some other sports, but Formula One, they don't even issue press releases anymore. They might, but they take quotes.
Right.
And they take X many quotes from the key people that tell the story in the quotes.
Yep. Let that do it.
Dot, 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 and dot.
Right.
And that tells it.
I wanted to bring up a quick, you know, just like you promoting the different countries, I think an extension of that is balance in our sport. The one thing I really love about the Youth Olympic sailing is that, you know, when you had the border cross type kiteboard racing, you saw kids from all these island nations and from different countries, but the kids from like France weren't necessarily white-looking French people.
Yep.
What someone would consider a normal French person. But I think we also have, besides the media training kind of things, we have an obligation of the sport to show more of the diversity that does exist. May not be in high numbers, but that does exist.
Completely agree. And I harp on St. Francis Yacht Club, for example, which is we're in one of the most diverse cities in the U.S. And St. Francis actually has quite a few non-white members, non-old, you know, guys. There are a lot of women members, there are a fair few Asian members. There are African American members. And do any of these people show up in pictures? Do they show up at the stag cruise in the member show? Well, I'm helping to recruit people into and you're absolutely right. We need to show pictures, even if it's, you know, we know that the diversity is low in the sport, other than affluent white people, but you can show it and encourage it, right? And start to show pictures of other people than Caucasians doing and enjoying our sport.
And we went through this actually, Ben Remacher and I, we literally looked at our story list and we said, do we have balance in non-native English speaking nations? Do we have balance in gender? And, you know, we didn't talk about race or socioeconomics or anything like that, but that's like the next stage, you know, just making sure you have balance. And this other side of things that I noticed is that most of our media that talk about sailing that are on broadcasts are not just native English speakers, so they have their own language, but they're also Anglo-Saxon. You know, like in Australia, we had a New Zealander and an Australian for the main commentators, and they have a lingo or a language that's a little bit different between the two of them, but it's closer to English than it is to American English, and then it's really far away from non-native English speakers. So the terms that they use, even for sailors, they get a little bit lost. Now, it's not their fault, but I think there should be a diversity in the. I don't want to take their jobs away because there are very few of those, but I think we should make a point of looking at the way we're presenting the sport and making sure that even the people that are presenting it represent the diversity that we have.
And when you say diversity, you're talking about diversity of what? Of the people sailing, or of
our world sailing population. So basically, you know, India is an incredible sailing nation. I think if you had someone might chastise me for this, but I think we need to see more gender balance. And if you had, I'm sure there are plenty of female Indian sailors that would be excellent at commentating on their sport.
Well, now let's don't get carried away. I know the sport pretty well, and there are a lot of good sailors from outside of the Anglo-Saxon countries, but India is not one of them, and it would be nice if it were, because it's such a huge country. But regardless, I think we all get your point, and there's a lot of people chiming in and giving us thumbs up. Dan Self, there's a new name, by the way. Welcome, Dan. Sailing could have a series like Netflix's Formula One, Drive to Survive. I've seen that. And it would do wonders for the sport's popularity. Jody Shields is saying, and Bo Outteridge is half of his Bang in the Corners crew, and that's a good crew. A lot of people agreeing with you. Cleary, I like sailing coverage for sailors, smaller audience for sure, best of breed live coverage. Yeah, I think we all agree it's a niche sport. It's always going to be a niche sport. I don't see it's ever going to replace soccer or football, American.
The people are so cool. Remember we talked about all of our old friends.
Yeah, but it's not going to replace baseball, hockey, basketball, and gridiron or rugby or soccer. But it's a niche sport, and therefore we should not prostitute the sport. Try to change it to make it more all we've done is ruin the sport by trying to bring the courses in close and have these stadium races, And do we have any more audience than when we did the 12 meters in?
It depends on the race. Sometimes it is absolutely.
It depends on the venue.
Yes.
And you can do that in San Francisco, of course, because of the way the wind blows. But you made another point here, and that is that and Andrew Pindar is saying spot on, Chris Musler, and that is that we have to, I thought you were going to make the point that we have to, and maybe you did, you have to have a presentation that is more about sailors than about technology, because as much as we all like the technology, and Ken Reed is one of the few people, Kenny Reed is one of the few people, and Gary Jobson actually can explain some of the technology in a way, and Bernie Wilson, that it doesn't go over the heads of even sailors, let alone non-sailors. And we've got to. Somebody just said it here. Jody Shields says, "I've been slapping on about this for years. We need to make our athletes the heroes, not the boats." And I submit to you, and I'm going to ask the question in a minute about whether Sail GP was boring or not, or somewhere in between. I submit to you that especially for the non-sailing public, they really don't care what kind of a vehicle it is in. They don't know the difference. They don't understand the difference, whether they're going 40 knots or 14 knots. They really don't care. What they want to see is Ian Murray and Dennis Conner or younger, fitter people than that. No offense to either of them, but who are in a race against each other. And both boats are in the same frame. Yeah. And you can see subtle changes, because right now there's nothing subtle about Sail GP. It's just they're not even in the same frame half the time.
And I think we do need to mention really quickly, I mean, we inevitably come to this, is that say what you will about it, but I think that 87 America's Cup that Gary Jobson and Jim Kelly did with ESPN,
yes,
that was you had the entire package. And like you had told me, they spent too much money on that probably. But it had every single part. But they had the characters to draw you in. We still have those kind of characters if they're not muzzled by their teams or their sponsors or whatever. But it was a very special time. It probably not to be repeated. But there's a lot to be learned from that kind of coverage. That was probably the best ever sailing event coverage there was. You had characters, you had heroes, you had villains, you had breakdowns. You had excellent on-the-water coverage. You had excellent commentary, and you had excellent sideshows.
You're talking about 87, America's Cup.
87.
In Fremantle.
In Fremantle.
You had two other things, by the way.
Yeah, tell me.
Sun and wind.
Yeah.
And waves.
And national.
And nationality. Julie is pointing out.
They had everything.
Right.
They had everything. And I think with technology now, like the live feed from the boats in Geelong for the 49ers and the NACRAs, were just smartphones. So, there's a lot you can do without having this crazy, big dome on the back of your boat, which the sailors hate, and they've been a problem. There are a lot of stories about that. I think, you have a lot of access with technology, and I think we just have to be able to use it. And that's what that experiment in Geelong was about for me, to try to insert the individuals and ask the right questions to raise everyone's level of understanding, not just learning about the athletes, but also just learning about how they work and how the sport works.
It bugs me when commentators are talking, and Andy Rose and I, when we do the commentary for Gov Cup, never do this. We always mention the name of the skipper, ideally first and second name, and after a while you can just use the first name even. It personalizes it. But when I watch some of the stuff that comes out of world sailing and they say the French, the Italian, excuse me, I can see that they're French or Italian on the sail. I can see the flag. I can see ITA or FRA. I want to know the people's name. I want to get to know the people. And then, as you say, it's nice to have a vignette. Go off and hear something about, as ABC used to do in our U.S. wide world of sports, they do the up close and personal.
Right.
But I think everybody on here agrees. And let me go have a look some more comments because we've got a lot. We've got 150 comments. And by the way, there is a comment from someone. There's another new name, Mark Van Note or Note.
Oh yeah, I just saw him at the climbing gym this weekend.
He said, "Chris, you are messing up our no screen time during the school week rule. William thinks you are famous."
And
that's his little son. His son has won our archipelago rally, which I don't know if we'll get to, but he and his son, when his little son William, who's probably 7 now, he stuck him in the front of a little frostbite dinghy in the fall, and he won our 50 boat archipelago rally in Watch Hill, Rhode Island.
Cool. Watch Hill's a nice spot.
It is.
Thomas Gabbro here. A lot of I'm just skipping over the names. Jay Hanfield makes another good point. He's always making good points. What play-by-play people do all the time is they forget that people are watching it on TV. The radio days, you needed a complete description of what's going on. Less is more now that TV and internet viewing is so good. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. And actually, that brings me perfectly to what I wanted to mention about my experience in Australia was that Nina Curtis and Peter Lester, who were the commentators, full-time commentators, were excellent at kind of skipping over that stuff and really giving you the big picture of what was going on in that race, like putting it in context. And I think that's why, Peter is such a pro. He had an age-old story list of all these great sailors and their accomplishments. He had a list that he can pull from that he shared with us. And Nina and he worked really well together, putting the whole race in context with adding the bits about the individuals and not just trying to do, like you said, the Yogi Berra, blow by blow or Harry Carey stuff.
Yeah, it just sometimes you stop and take a deep breath and let the pictures tell the story.
Yep,
I assert, in fact, I assert that our sport is more like golf or tennis, and the commentary should be, with respect. I thought Jody did a great job last year, Jody Shields with the Sail GP stuff, and Shirley Robertson. And I don't know who these guys and gals were that were doing it this past weekend in Sydney. But when you have to keep saying, "Isn't this fantastic? Wow, this is great. Hold it." You don't ever hear anybody at a proper event saying, "Wow, this is this is a great game. It's really close." You might have them barely say, "Well, it looks like this could be an interesting finish, and a football game is close or a basketball game." But people get tired of it. They want to hear, as you say, the people, a few insights, and not be yammering on like I do on this show.
Yes.
Yes.
Clark Chapin said, "What made Ford versus Ferrari a cool movie was that Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles' characters, not the cars."
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
You agree with that, Chris?
Absolutely. And again, one of the things that we are having a hard time doing is playing up those rivalries. You almost myself talking to the Australian skippers and crews for the NACRA, talking to the American FX team. There's a lot at stake between these sailors. It's not mountaineering where you can die necessarily, but there's an awful lot at stake for these sailors. And this was one of the greatest. I was so psyched I got to witness this at this regatta, that there were so many of these little stories. But the challenge is that your access to the sailors, you almost feel like you're going to mess up their mentality by asking them these questions. I certainly felt that way, even though I did ask those questions. And if they don't answer them, we have to feel comfortable to push a little harder and find out, what's going on with them, and find out, if they're concerned or if they're not concerned or if they're bummed out. We want to know it.
Exactly. Julia?
So I think going back to you, Julia, finding those characters is our challenge. Is we need some faith and trust between the athletes and the journalists or the commentators and the broadcasters to say, "Hey, let us help you tell your story, and trust me, it's going to be good to get it off your shoulders, and we're going to want to watch you more, you know, if we learn more about you.
Chris Bulgers said, if announcers for AC in Bermuda had focused on the people, they would have realized that the top 3 foiling performance sailors in the world were whipping a guy who never won a foiling regatta and has spent his time boxing.
Well, that's right, and that's what is so cool about the presidential race. People are all the time comparing notes on different people. Now they realize that the youngest man, did you know, Chris, the youngest man in the U.S. presidential race, you know who that is now?
Currently?
Trump. The youngest man in the U.S. presidential. But it's that's an interesting factoid. Is it, is it relevant? Well, probably not, but the point is, it's those kind of factoids, and Kenny Reed can do it because he knows everybody. Gary can do it because he knows everybody. I can do it because I've been around and I'm old and so on. But we need younger guys like you who get out there and do it and know people, have the confidence of because it's a good point. You have to have the confidence of the sailor. I don't like the word athletes. So the sailors.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And you have you have to use and you have to have their confidence. Obviously, I just said the same thing. The other point about 86, 87 down in Frio for that cup, America's Cup 26, was that there were personalities who were on display. They were not all straight-jacketed by sponsors and by corporate PR people.
Right.
And when you went to the press, in fact, the press conference was arguably the most fun time of the day, and you couldn't get in there because the place was packed and the backers and sponsors wanted to go as well as the PR people, and because you never knew what Dennis was going to say. I wouldn't, why would you bore a new hole in? Why would you build a boat in fiberglass unless you were cheating? And Tom Blackarl looks down the table, as everybody knows, the famous exchange, and I'm not sure how to said that, Dennis.
Yeah.
And the bets that were made and so on. And I also think the problem with the mixed zone where you say, well, it's more efficient for multiple languages.
Right.
But if you don't put the sailors on a table with a microphone in front of them and have a moderator for that press conference like Bruno Trublet did beautifully and the late, great Bill Ficker did and others.
Yeah, you did that too.
I do that. Andy Rose actually does a better job than I because he even knows the kids better than I because he's vetted them all and helped on the acceptance committee and so on. But I've gotten to know them as they've come back. But yes, you got to have – that's what brings the personalities out. What you were doing with Hayley and Nathan is what brings the personalities out and makes this cool. Okay, we got to go back to the comments and then wrap this up. We're an hour and 45 in.
Awesome.
Julia, you got any?
Well, there are a lot. I just would tell everybody at this point, which I always do, please read the comments. There are lots of good comments and lots of good points, and there's just not time to cover all of them on air, but there is worth reading, and you will feel very good about your performance today, and among other things.
There's 162 comments, and moreover, for those of you watching in replay, the comments are open, so you can comment, and we do read the comments in replay, and a lot of the others you can click on Facebook to have the comments be the newest or the most relevant, and we do go back and look at them just to see what people say, because there's interesting comments, and sometimes croutonicism that then we delete if somebody's an idiot. Andrew Pindar, it's definitely a dark and stormy night in Scarborough, North Yorkshire. Steve Gruber, Philip Friedman, Chris is one sharp cookie, wonderful guest for SI. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you,
Philip,
Steve.
rather. Philip, that's Philip Friedman down in San Diego.
Sorry, Phil Friedman.
Jay Hanfield says, the Sail GP announcer called the course in Sydney the racetrack. We have to keep the sport going, but we need to stay true to the core of the sport. Who won the last Vendée? You know, the sailor, not the boat. Good point. But I also, Jay, I want, and Chris, I'd like your opinion on this. We were talking about diversity a minute ago in language. I make the argument the other way, is that we need to unify, and I don't care if we use Aussie expressions or Kiwi expressions or French or German or Spanish expressions, other than we got to use one language, obviously. But when somebody calls it a kicker, and somebody else calls it a boom bang, and somebody else
Right.
calls it, we need to get all the announcers and the problem is the announcers are all amateurs. They're not pros. They're not doing this all day, every day. But if we could please call, and the racetrack, Jay, doesn't bother me. It's a racetrack, and that's kind of a euphemism for course, and, we're getting around the racetrack. Okay. But if we could please use, because the sailing is technical enough, and they've all these stupid technical terms, which we should try to unify. And then if you're doing the color commentary like I do for Andy, Andy will be the play-by-play, and we'll have some kid with us really getting hyper-technical about match racing. And then I'll say, well, for our non-sailors, and half of them are non-sailors because of the parents and the grandparents of the kids and club members back that are maybe power boaters. Well, left port means left, and starboard means right. Okay, most everybody knows that. But you have to explain in very simple terms. Well, if the wind shifts to the right, that usually favors the boat to the right, because they can turn and cut the other boat off at the pass, in effect, sail a shorter distance. And if the wind shifts to the left, it favors the boat to the left. And I've got a whole long list in all the years I've been doing commentary for VIPs, who are almost all out on a VIP boat for a sponsor. They're almost all non-sailors. And you have to have these nice, simple, elegant, quick descriptions of what's going on and why. And apparent wind. And on and on and on. Okay, Julia? Julia's got a point here.
Okay, cool. Go on, Julia.
No point?
No, they're just, Sangmaster says there are 78 entries in the Newport to race, and Gerardo Seeliger said, excellent evening, very brave.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you, Gerardo. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say that, what were we just talking about?
Language and unifying the language.
Yeah. So in terms of that, I love getting into the detail on this, because what we're assuming is that we want to do better at how we present the sport, right? And I think that one thing that I should mention is Bernard Schopfer at the Yacht Racing Forum. I think they have been talking about these things. I didn't get to watch the full media and sailing. Shirley Robertson is excellent. And Meg Riley was on that group, who runs an ocean sailing business. I think, and then, don't think we can talk about these kind of things without talking about people like Andy Green and Tucker Thompson, who have a mix of skills between the two of them. We don't hear from them as much these days for the smaller events, but I think you're right about that unification of how we present the sport. And I think World Sailing meetings or Bernard Schopfer's Yacht Racing Forum are places to get everyone together to talk about that, because we are a small sport, we are niche, so we can grab like the 5 people that are doing sailing broadcasting around the world and sit down and talk about it.
Yeah, we could probably just do it online. I mean, these days with something like this and a moderator and put people, I can actually do 4 people, I think, now on Skype, and you can use Zoom and some other things.
We should do it live. I mean, I don't think there's any reason these should be closed door discussions.
I totally agree with that, as Julia and everyone else knows. Julia's got a comment.
No, I don't.
Oh, you don't? Well, there's a suggestion here, Chris, that Clark Chapin's making. Maybe we should establish a Sailing Illustrated Bulwer-Lytton Award and he's the one that did the famous "It Was a Dark and Stormy Night," for events that issue press releases that start with a weather report. The trophy would be a giant crouton on a pedestal.
The Kalamata olive crouton?
On a pedestal or something like that. Who's with me? I totally agree, Clark, and I'm going to appoint Chris to be the chair of that subcommittee for Sailing Illustrated. But if U.S. Sailing, if they issue one more release that starts out with it's astonishing. Go back and read the releases they sent out in the last 2 weeks about all the activity. And it's because, frankly, it's because when you don't have good results, you got to talk about the weather. It's like a lawyer says, if you're right on the facts, pound the facts. If you're wrong on the facts, pound the law.
Well, I know we're short on time, but I did want to bring up something that is, I have a micro involvement with a club, but this is a big question on everyone's mind for all the yacht clubs in the United States, which I think they're so very important, just like the rise of community boating. I'm a member of the Cruising Club of America. I'm a relatively young member, And that organization has, I'll get to my point, but that organization.
A relatively young member?
Well, I'm a really young member. The average age is nearing 70 and the membership is going up. So the organization has some challenges, but like a lot of clubs of any type do, and young individuals, going up through that sport or that interest group, have learned differently these days. They have different needs. They have different lifestyles, and so we know that in our sport, yacht clubs have to adapt a little bit. And I'm working on that with this Cruising Club of America. I just wanted to share that with your audience in terms of identifying what young ocean sailors look like, and how they practice the sport the same and different than the current cadre of what it is. A lot of people who've been very fortunate, most of them are white, to retire relatively early and do a lot of cruising. And that's not really going to happen for my generation or before us, or not for a lot of us. So even though there are a tremendous amount of people interested in the sport, I believe that, and the YouTube channels like SV Dallas and a lot of other cool channels and businesses that take people ocean sailing, like 59 North, are very popular, but clubs are not that popular. So we're trying to figure out ways where, the CCA, once the authority on ocean sailing, still has all that awesome knowledge and is doing really great things, running the Bermuda race, writing cruising guides, being involved with the Oceanic Committee with Stan Honey at World Sailing. The organization needs members to survive.
Yes.
So, and every club, not just sailing clubs, have these same issues. And I just, I'm always happy to learn from other sports how they are analyzing and adjusting their clubs. This is a paper club, the Cruising Club of America, but how they adjust their clubs to bring in new members. St. Francis is excellent at that. I bet you San Diego is excellent at that. I know U.S. Sailing does a great job of bringing clubs together to talk about these things. I should go to those meetings. But I love talking about it. For ocean sailing, this ties into my love of shorthanded sailing and covering the Vendée Globe and the Route de Rhum. And it's just things I really love talking about. So when we talk about how the sport is presented, diversity, Tom, in the types of sailing that we do as well. That's why I love writing for the New York Times, because they let me write about as long as it's a good story and good people, then they let me write about any angle of the sport, and I've covered a pretty broad swath of it, and I want to cover more.
And congratulations to you, Bravo Zulu, because we didn't mention this, but one of the problems in the sport is just getting space, and you have to convince an editor, and maybe a managing it. You got to convince some number of people to give you some ink, some space for your silly story. And
that's why it's every couple months, and we look at events and we see where the America's Cup is going to line up. You see what Chris Clary is planning on doing. You see if Chris Clary is on a big assignment in the French Open or whatever it is, that regardless of what regatta that I'd like to write about, it's not going to be in the Times that week.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's fine.
Yeah, it's the same thing here on Sailing Illustrated. We don't cover local regattas. We've really sort of given up on really even regattas. We work on the basis that the people are interested in the America's Cup, the ocean race, and that event's got some problems. Yeah. And the major ocean races. Obviously, Sydney Hobart's is arguably the most popular race we cover. But, people say, why don't you cover the big boat series here in San Francisco? Well, it's a local regatta.
Yeah. And there are stories everywhere. We know that. The threshold for me for the Times is really high. And that's why I love writing about sailing for sailing magazines, because then I can take a story that wouldn't necessarily be of interest to the Times, but I can write the hell out of it for Sail Magazine or Sailing World or whoever. And I really enjoy that. I'm glad people are still looking at those and,
But it's still about the people.
Yeah.
Of course. If you look at the Sailing World stuff I'm doing right now with my foiling column, and I just wrote an article about sailing on a 26-footer for, a team that we're going to do the IRC ORC Worlds in Newport. I'm having more fun sailing on a 26-foot little sport boat, and I never thought I'd like those boats at all. Like cramming 5 individuals into such a small boat and racing in perf, forget about it. I would never have done it before, but I gave it a chance, and it's a great story.
Julia.
Jay Hanfield said, so many clubs in New England are turning into motorboating clubs. We have to get the young involved. And
that's all over the place.
And it is
not
something
just-
we never talk about, but it's especially the younger generation has about 5 different demands on its time. So motorboating is faster.
Motorboating's fun. We just have to do both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what do you say about U.S. Sailing's motorboat training? And do we want to get overlap too much with?
Don't get me started.
Okay, gotcha.
I think U.S. Sailing. I'm great. They're doing. I started the training program when I was executive director.
And I love that organization. I think Corey Sertle's doing an excellent job.
Don't get me started.
By the way,
I love Corey, and I think she's doing a good job. But that's a whole nother issue. John Sangmeister, Dave Perry are lifelong dear friends of mine. Maybe not lifelong, but let's talk about a couple other things here.
Yes.
And comments, because we got Mario Sampaio agreeing that standardizing the jargon and the technical stuff is good.
Excellent.
There are so many. Comments. We're almost up to 200 comments here, which is unusual. And people they're teasing us now because they're putting on their local weather.
Mm-hmm.
And Wingrove, I agree with Bill Wingrove. The weather is a significant part of the story, that it should not be forbidden to be mentioned. Of course not. Tell the 79 Fastnet or 98 Hobart, of course, but that's not the issue. That those become the issue in
Right.
those 2 races. But when every press release starts out, it was a dark and stormy night, or champagne sailing
Yeah.
conditions.
I know it's tough, but it's not easy for the organizers who are putting these together, the writers who are doing these things. When I'm down in the Caribbean regattas, everyone's doing the best they can. And like we said, it can't be like a New Yorker feature every press release. But I've been on every side of the sport now, and in terms of media, and it ain't easy. It's not an easy sport to cover. It's not an easy sport to write on.
There's a song there somewhere. It ain't easy. Okay, let's press on here. This is great discussion, and as I said, there's a ton of comments. And as Julia likes, Leandro Spina's on. Welcome to him, Mark Nichols.
Oh, awesome! I just wrote about him. He's a ninja for figuring out how to find a pathway for kids and how to coach. He's like one of those teachers that figures out how every kid learns and what they need, and he figures it out what they need.
He's Argentinian. I think he's Argentinian, right? And and he's here in the States.
An unsung hero of our sailing.
Well, I think I'm sure he's unsung, but he is certainly a hero, and he is running ODP, the Olympic Development Program.
Yes.
And having good results for U.S. sailing. My mother, now see, this is a good point. My mother says, Julie, did you see that?
I did.
She said, I would watch Brad Pitt tie his shoes and give him an Oscar. But no, I think Janice Davis is right.
Yeah.
That goes back to the Ford and Ferrari thing.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And Jeff Dreschler said, today's broadcast is making me want to pull out my camera again.
Oh, cool.
Good. Okay. And Leandro Spina says, I'm an American. Okay. Of course.
Awesome.
Okay, good stuff.
Well,
let's press on here. Look at
yeah,
some more.
yeah.
So we get a lot of thumbs up and laughs. Let me look at some more things here. There's still a question about whether the America's Cup World Series in Colliery and Portsmouth are going to happen. I have Julia. You got a text from, was it John Emmett, or it was?
Yeah.
Somebody texted saying that a whole lot of events in Italy have just, there was a thing on Sailing IT, Italy, the Italian website, that they have just, the FIV, Federazione Italiana di Vela, have just canceled a bunch of their events, called off because of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening in Colliery.
They just said they're still at work.
On those 2 events. Well, on Colliery, again, the issue is not whether the organizers want to do it. I know the organizers want to host it. I know Mr. Bertelli has put in a lot of money as an investment into that event, and they want to see, the locals and others want to see a return on the investment. But if the immigration folks aren't going to let people in, and worse than that, you go to the regatta and then you come back and you can't get back into your home country, or if you do, you have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks or whatever.
Right.
So we'll see how this all plays out. I hope somebody comes up with a vaccine or a therapeutic that can allow people to go, and maybe these regattas, maybe these other regattas, Julia, and events. We see that they're taking the fans out of the stadiums. We know they are doing that in a number of sports, and hopefully smarter people will figure it out. So that the most important thing, and I say this again, the most important thing, forget about colliery, but is for the athletes, not to have a repeat of 1980. The athletes, sailors, but athletes beyond sailing have to have their Olympic day in the sun, because they've been training sometimes for 4, 8, 12 years, and it's grossly unfair. And if they can't run it all in Tokyo or in Enoshima, you can split it up. You can do some certain other things or delay it. I hear today, by the way, guys and girls, the IOC is meeting in Lausanne. They've said again, we're for sure going to do this, but I'm hearing that they have a clause in the contract, and they have the possibility of postponing the Tokyo Olympics, and that's being seriously considered now.
Yeah, well, you're not going to win either way on these things, certainly in the near term. I mean, it looks like I'm going to lose a lot of planned work this spring. You know, I have 3 events in Italy between now and June. And then I have Enoshima World Cup in Japan in June.
That's been moved. That's been called off or moved, I think.
That already has, yeah. And already the 49ers have canceled their 2 big events in China.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, you say America's Cup in Cagliari is on, but then
repeat,
the people that
repeat after me. Yeah. Cagliari.
So,
there you go.
Cagliari. So if you say that one's on, the people that don't feel comfortable enough to go are going to get mad, and the people that are going to be there are going to be really stressed out. And that's what's going on around the world right now for anything. Going to school.
They didn't give an answer, but the language is, in Calgary, we work for the America's Cup.
Well, here's the problem: is that the decision is going to be made in Rome by the Italian health authorities, and then it's going to be made by the health authorities back when you come back into the U.S. Julia, you know that we have a nursing friend at Kaiser who told us last night that when somebody comes into the hospital, now this is Kaiser's the big HMO, right?
Yep.
Health Maintenance Organization here in the States, and hospitals not throughout, but various places across the country. And they were told yesterday morning, when a patient comes in and they have traveled outside the country, the first question, have you been outside the country? It doesn't matter if they have a sniffle or a fever. No, seriously, Chris, have you been outside the country? If they have, the first thing they do is move them into one of these rooms with negative pressure, and then the doctor calls them on the phone, and they interview them. And then if they don't have enough of these rooms, and of course, so on and so forth. So somebody else has just made the point here. I was seeing, let me look here. Somebody said that they're not going to let Alistair Banks is saying Ferrari may not be allowed into Australia for the F1. And let's say, gang, that you have the Olympics or some other event, but you then are not. Then the health authorities say, well, you can't have the Iranians, the South Koreans, the Chinese, the Italians, for example, where there's hot spots. The Bay Area here, California, has become a hot spot, mostly because of a nursing home where everybody apparently got infected up in Washington and so on. So this thing's going to play out, and it's going to be difficult. Hey, I want to make one other point. Clark Chapin, I don't say that U.S. sailing shouldn't do powerboat training. That's not my point at all. I think U.S. sailing should be the United States Yacht Racing Union. And then if they want to have a training division that goes off, but right now training is the tail that's wagging the U.S. Yacht Racing Unions, or what it used to be called.
USIRU.
It's wagging the U.S. sailing. You got the U.S. Power Squadron. You've got lots of other. Colliery is a coal mine and everything associated. Oh, my mother. She is a cunning linguist. Remember, Clark Chapin is saying a deployable vaccine is 18 months away, according to the CDC. Yeah, okay. In any event, let's carry on here because we're at 2 hours and 5, and Julie's usually she likes to say we should wrap it up, and I'm never sure if that means because she needs to go take a powder or what. But let's go on. Quick quick pieces of news, and then we'll wrap this up. But Sir Ben
Yeah.
Ainslie dominated. He swept Sail GP. And I don't know if there's a good comment about the America's Cup or is kind of a sad commentary about Sail GP. I really personally think it's neither. Ben has sailed these F-50s when they were the boats in Bermuda. So he sailed these boats a fair bit, as you know, Chris. And for him to show up at Sail GP with his professional 7 days a week America's Cup team who've been training, and they've been in the Artemis simulator in London. And for him to win every race, virtually win every race, the one race he didn't win is when they were already in the final and they held back so as not to get any kind of a collision.
I know. I think we were a little bit misled in Bermuda, really. I had the impression that he just, in Bermuda with his team.
Look, his Chris, call us. The boat was terrible.
Yeah.
In Bermuda, you weren't misled. The boat was terrible. And Ben is the best Olympic sailor in the history, certainly in the modern history. You can argue about Paul Elstrom, but the boat was terrible. And now you put him on equal footing in one designed boats, and he's going to sweep a regatta, especially when he has Goobs and he has all these other guys with him.
Yeah, he had two of the most excellent foiling catamaran sailors with him in that discipline. But he was just cool as a cucumber, like just not frazzled by anything, just rock up, win a bunch of races, and rock out again.
Exactly. And let's have a little video here. That's a very brief video, and it shows some of the excitement. It's the highlights video, but it also highlights how, frankly, boring the event was. Have a look.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. The match race is almost upon us. Go hard or go home.
Yours? Yep, mine. Keep turning if you can. Yep. He's got a penalty for some reason. We got a penalty.
OCS penalty. Entered early.
Well, that's the Australians have got a penalty for entering the box early.
Did you think we're early? I don't think so. I was surprised.
Tom Slingsby has it all to do here in the early stages.
We just got to get going. Couple of bad waves here. Okay, pressure this way. Long way back here. Will.
And the run into the finish.
Nice, guys. Awesome work, Phil. All right, lads. Well done, mate.
Yeah, mate, so angry right now.
Stupid mistake.
I don't want to be the positive, but a lot to take away from this.
I mean, it's the best sailing I've ever done.
Did you see that? I just noticed that Sail GP branded champagne. Apparently, they don't have a champagne supplier, so just Sail GP. Do you think?
Go ahead.
Do you think those? What do you think those words were that they bleeped?
Oh, well, we can only guess. But the one thing that I have a lot of questions for those two, or a lot of things that I want to share that I know about those two. And I watched all that racing, and I didn't hear anyone ask the questions that I wanted to ask. And no offense to those guys, they did an excellent job covering the racing, like really great. But Tom Slingsby has an attitude that if he wins, he wants to win by more the next time. That's a really important phrase to think about an individual of their character type. And that's something worth digging into. And Ben Ainslie, he's been through some pretty stressful moments in his life. I wrote I interviewed him when he almost got a Rule 69 against him for the 2011 Finn World Championships in Fremantle. And but when
he was upset because there was a photo boat in front of him throwing a wake, and after the race he went over to the photo boat, had some words, and then jumped out of his fin into the photo boat and flailed on the guy.
Something awesome has happened with that individual in terms of managing that aggression, like that they need to channel into their racing. The other thing is that I think maybe there's something to be discussed with Ben Ainslie when he's getting champagne poured over him. Do you think of racing an actual break from managing such a big team? Because he's almost like the Chris Dixon and Dennis Connors of their day, and Ken Reeds, who had to manage an entire team and race the boat.
Good point.
So I want to know, he looked so happy there. Maybe it's a break for him.
Well, I'm sure it was, but it was impressive. Regardless, and
it's very impressive.
It's also clear that in this day and age, to try to manage a team and race, that kind of went out with the 2003 Cup. It's very difficult. And Ben, he's the ostensible team leader, but he's got Grant
There's a lot of
Simmer.
pressure on him.
He's got his Grant Simmer as his CEO, so that Grant really is running the team, and Ben is running the sailing team and also being the spokesman and so on. But let's look at the final results. Great Britain, of course, won. And I hate their scoring system. I get this scoring system. I don't mind this, the high point scoring for the overall results. And this is now the season leaderboard. But I wish they would use low point during the regatta.
Yeah, I know.
Huh? Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. The one thing that I noticed that stands out there, and a lot of us kind of looked at this, is the Danish team is new, and when they announced their team, that we were all holding our breaths because France lost Marie Rieu, Billy Besson's crew, and Volvo sailor, and so we were all holding our breaths to have one female sailor, come on the new team, and it didn't happen. And I just want to bring that point up that, as far as engagement is concerned, you can engage an audience with a whole group of guys racing really fast boats because it is really awesome. It's really, the fastest decision making you can have in our sport. But again, I think women can do those roles on those boats, or any role really on those boats. And the fact that we're not seeing it is just, another lack of opportunity for women to progress in our sport. So, I just think it's a missed opportunity.
You can argue that both ways, and let's not get into that now.
Yeah, of course.
It would be
Every
nice
time
to
I see Denmark, I think about it.
Well, and Nikolai Sehested.
Yeah.
I was impressed by the Spanish, and of course they don't list here. They list Jordi Yammer, and they don't list Phil Robertson from New Zealand,
who's actually steering.
So, in any event, that's the final results after the first regatta.
It's great racing. I mean, it really is great racing.
Well, I don't know. When one team wins all the races, including the two practices.
We didn't see it coming. I couldn't have predicted that.
Well, I won't say who did, because I had a bet with Mark Husted that they would. I didn't think they'd. To be fair, I didn't think they'd win all the races either, but they did do well. And congrats.
And on that note, what would we do without some of these events? I mean, there are so many events that come on and go away. I remember you were talking about Scott McLeod, Pro Sail and the Ziploc series.
Yeah.
Back with the I-14s and catamarans and stuff. That was awesome. So even though those aren't in legacy events, my childhood was better for it. My career was chosen because of those influences.
No doubt. No,
and it's the same thing with Sail GP.
Good. No, it's a good point. And I always say, and of course I was benefited from Larry's largesse as well. How's that for alliteration, you two?
Very.
We got a New York Times writer here, and we've got a Stanford, senior series Stanford grad, and
and a Michigander just crushed us.
and a Michigander who went to a public school. I was going to run this as the question of the day, and that is Sail GP, was it boring, exciting, or in the middle? And I'm not going to do that because we pretty well discussed that.
Yeah.
And you can leave your comments below if you want. What did you think? And I asked the same question on my Facebook page, as you probably remember, Julia. Mm. And there were, Chris, you probably saw them as well. It's just a throng, a huge long thread of comments, and pretty equally split, actually, between was it boring or was it really exciting or was it somewhere in the middle. But thank goodness for Larry and the approaching $1 billion that he's put into the sport.
Wow.
And if you and I can do a better than a back of the envelope calculation for you if you want, but between the and I'm not, that doesn't include Sayonara and what he did in the Maxi campaign.
Right, of course, way back.
Okay, other America's Cup news. We know that the Italians are back on the water after more than a month off, and the damage to the yacht when their mast came down, the broken forestay fitting. Not too much to the mast, not too much to the sails, but it turned out to be a fair bit of damage to the hull.
Yeah, it's a drag.
They did get the boat in the water, and they have sailed now. They load tested it a few days ago, and they're back sailing, so we're glad and happy to see that. And then New York Yacht Club issued this video yesterday, which I thought was kind of a cool video. Have a look.
At the end of the day, we're here to win, and that is paramount to everybody's decision making throughout. Just different questions of how we're going to get there.
Trust doesn't just happen overnight. The biggest faith is in the 11 guys that are around you while you're out sailing at 40 plus knots.
Once we get on the water, we're all pretty much on the same page about how we're going to take care of the business.
The American Magic team is a pretty eclectic group.
You have teams of 120 people from design and engineering, shore support.
With so many people who are so driven to achieving the same thing.
Hand choose and pick a lot of guys on the boat that I've worked with and sailed with over the past decade.
We have all the power in the handles from the grinding side. And then there are the 3 guys at the back, myself, Andrew and Dean.
As a sailor growing up, winning the America's Cup has always been a pinnacle event of our sport.
I know quite a lot of these guys through competing.
You know, I've been racing against Paul Goodison since I was in high school, so, you know, we've been racing against each other for that long, but never together. The more you can learn about each other and be with each other is certainly helpful for those more intense situations.
There isn't much downtime involved, but quite often we'll try and meet up and do something a bit away from sailing.
The team dynamic is always, you know, that's your X factor. I agree with the term that the stronger we are as a family, the harder we can argue as a family.
The Castle Hill Lighthouse.
The trust component of this boat is immense. The point is, when you have 10 other lives in the helmsman's hands, everybody on the boat has to trust him. We practice for the catastrophic situation that we may experience on the water.
If one of us is slightly off in the timing, how do we cover so that we don't capsize?
Whether or not you can depend on a person to do their job in a critical moment is something that you learn over years.
You know, when push comes to shove, we'll be that team that nobody can put away.
Okay, gang, good video. Did you like that? Julia's looking at comments. What did you think, Chris?
Well, yeah, I just watched that today. And I mean, obviously, I like when our sport is presented in a very visual way. I really try to promote close-ups of individuals working with their hands in places other than on a boat. And I think that video does a really great job of not just showing all the aspects or some of, you know, a more diverse group of aspects that involved in America's Cup team, because that's what I want to see and that's what non-sailors can relate to. But I also think that the image that it presents, so it's excellent cinematography. The image that it presents is there. Pretty serious business, but they did a good job of tapping into, you know, I don't know, it's not a virtue, but whatever trust is, just tapping into that, you know, human interaction side of it. And it was really nice. I mean,
and it was highly,
they have the time.
And it was highly personal.
Yeah, it was. I mean, they have the bandwidth to do it. I know I talked to Rob Ouellette, their COO, who's a good friend, about the profiles they did on Robin Lesh, and I forgot who the other individual was. He said, what do you think of those? And I think, I want to learn even more about them, but I think it's a great start. It just takes an awful lot of time and money to produce these things in a way that our standards are really high as individuals in modern media.
Yeah,
they should
be.
They did an excellent job with that. I think it presents like Terry said at the end, a really formidable team, a team that you just can't put away.
Gordon Smith back on the Sail GP said, I thought Sail GP was excellent, but maybe that was my Brad Pitt moment. Steve Gruber, I think my mother has coined a phrase here, Brad Pitt moment.
Yeah.
He's not my type, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
some questions about the Rule 69, the thing. There was a Rule 69 thing with respect to Ben, actually.
Yeah, I forget what ended up, but it didn't end up with a...
No, there was no penalty.
No.
It would have had to take the World Championship away from him, and then there was some other. Jody Shields asked an important... He says, he asked another question, important. He says, was the racing boring or was the results boring? Yeah, okay.
That's a great question.
That's a great question. Fair enough, Jody. He was so much fun. Thanks again, Jody, for being on the show. We thanked you at the top of the show. You are a real hoot and a great fresh voice, as is Chris Musler, who's with us here at the other end of my Skype line in Jamestown, Rhode Island. Andrew Pindar, who's still here. It's late there. Andrew, have a glass of port and go to bed. Well, only if you can change history. Clark Chapin is the run-in with a fatality. Yeah, okay. Jay Hamfield, I was told I'm an old fart because I wanted an unfolding mono, and the foiling is more exciting, but SailGP has shown me that all the foiling talk and how it's more exciting is just talk, okay? Leandro Spina, great job, both of you. There are so many great stories of U.S. sailors. The country is full of talent.
Yeah, he's right.
Yes.
No,
that's right.
He is. Okay, guys, that pretty well wraps it up. I want to do one more Bravo Zulu here, and it's we have a little bit of music with our graphics, Chris. Come on, you got to class the thing up, right?
I love it. I love every bit of it. And before we sign off, remind me. I wanted to make one more comment.
Okay, Nick Bice has joined.
Oh, awesome!
Bicey, hello, Doug McLean, Tom Pace. I met Tom Pace down in San Diego. Tom, nice to see you.
And Doug McLean, the blonde hair Doug McLean.
I don't know. I don't know if he's got blonde hair or not, but we talked.
He's excellent.
Chris, we talked about this. I'm going to run this video. We talked about this in the pre-show today. This is a terrific event. That's why British yachting is so cool.
This is the big one for us, the Dinghy show. It's been great to see so many families here as well.
This is the Dinghy show at Alexander Palace. It's an annual event put on by the RYA.
I think there's something here for everyone. This is a great place to talk to lots of people in one place and find a kind of sailing that will work for you.
I think it's a brilliant show. I love the new layout. I think it works really well, and I think it's fantastic.
Chris, have you been to that?
No, I haven't. And even as a kid, I've been wanting to go to that thing. So any sailor, any little kid sailor, that's like, they do such a great job. The country is so unique in terms of the hundreds and thousands of little clubs that they have and sailing around little lakes. Excellent sailors come out of pockets of the River X. I was just talking to Stevie Morrison about that. And the Bridges who sail kite surfing all come out of this tiny little club. So it's just, it's something
lakes,
really special
rivers, the ocean, and they're all within a couple hours and train ride even.
Yeah, I mean, talk about talent, and Leandro talks about the U.S. Yes, we're huge and we have tremendous talent. Britain squeezes talent out of the tiniest pieces of water. It's really remarkable.
Well, I've been to the show. I've given America's Cup talks there, and I commend it to you. Get over there and see it. And bravo Zulu to the RYA for what was another apparently terrific event. Dick Andersen, the filmmaker, saying that was a hideous music track. Well,
who cares? I was excited. The kids were excited.
Tokyo Olympics, the 24th of July through the 9th of August. The coronavirus, we're not going to go into that now. We're going to wrap this up. We're almost 2.5 hours in. This may be our longest show ever, Julie, other than a watch party. Italy has been...
Two talkers.
Hey, Chris?
Yes.
Julie is saying that the ribs are going to be overcooked. Apparently, she's got a rack of ribs
going
on. It's not your fault. The coronavirus is obviously Italy's been hard hit. We'll talk some more about that on Friday and see because it is going to impact the sport and the economies and so on. But just to wrap this turkey up, you can find our previous shows and our Facebook, and you can find anything. We're reasonably popular now. You can Google TFE Live, simply Google TFE Live, and you'll find our shows, which are on Facebook, on our Facebook page. You can also find them now on YouTube. In about an hour, I'll have this show up on YouTube. You can find today's show immediately we go off the air. And you can. Tati Text in Germany is joined. Welcome to Tatia Pagorni. One of the you should, if you don't know her, Chris. Do you know Tatia Pagorni in Hamburg, Germany?
No,
great sailor, married to a great sailor. You should look her up.
Cool.
And any event, you can TFE Live is the Google, and you'll find any of our previous shows or future shows if you have to come watch them in replay. Julia,
sir,
you want to say anything here?
Yes. Take this opportunity to like, share, and subscribe, and give us a thumbs up, and share this great experience with other people who win it.
A lot of comments. I think in fact, we got 232 comments. And if you will become a patron, you can go over on sailingillustrated.com and become a patron via Patreon. And some people give us a PayPal contribution because this is viewer-supported television, webcasts, in our niche sport, on our niche sailing sport. And we appreciate very much your support. You can go to paypal.me/sailingillustrated, and again, Google it. Thanks to the credits for today's photos, videos, and the music that we use at the tops and tails of the show. And Chris, thanks very much to you. Appreciate it.
Yes, Chris, you were wonderful.
Yeah,
Come back.
thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. I just had one quick comment. Do we have a second for that?
Sure, of course.
Okay. Just about the format, it's exciting in our small sport to have anyone talk about it, right? Especially in depth like what we're doing. So I just want to thank you for that opportunity. Also, you're also pretty controversial in our sport as well, because you bring up big ideas and you disagree with some things. And
controversial? Moi, me?
But it's great, because I think that if we can't ask questions or bring up ideas and can't intelligently counter them if you have a different opinion, then I think we have a problem in our sport. Our sport is really unique. You don't have to be an intellect to do our sport, but somehow it brings out the smartest in us, because it challenges us all to work above our abilities. Our sport does, because it's kind of limitless. So I just wanted to share that. I think this format is really wonderful. I think it's professional and more mainstream than we're used to seeing in our sport. And I kind of miss the Sailing Anarchy's influence in our sport in terms of bringing out, you're not like them, but in certain ways, but I miss those opportunities to ask the hard questions and go against the grain. And I think you do a whole bunch of those things, and you have the intelligence in the background to do it. So
I'm blushing.
It's important.
I'm blushing, and Julia's ribs are going to burn.
Yeah. But it's okay. It's okay to disagree. And Russell Coutts is a perfect example of that. Like, I remember sailing with him in Key West, and we were at a cocktail party, and he was talking to someone, and someone was really kind of picking a fight with him about some issue in the sport. And he said, "That's great." Now he goes, "Now I'm going to argue with you." And he didn't say it like he was going to fight him. He said it like, "Okay, bring it on. Let's have a conversation about this." And I really, it sticks in my head that those kind of conversations where you're like, "Okay, I'm ready to debate this with you."
Totally agree.
Absolutely.
I think it's wonderful.
No, it's exactly. And that's, again, on the U.S. sailing and world sailing, that's why I don't like the closed doors meeting behind telephone conference call. I love it when everybody's open and radical transparency. Let's see what people think, because I certainly don't have all the best ideas. This group is a smart group that comes on here and tolerates me for 2.5 hours. And we thank all of you. And I want to thank again, Chris, you very much. It's been a terrific show. Julia?
Absolutely. Nice to meet you.
Really nice to meet you.
Too,
and come on out here and visit us, Chris, sometime soon.
Yeah, next time you're
come
here,
out and do the half pint of rum or something like that.
No, that's down in San Diego, and it's called the Hot Rum.
The Hot Rum.
The Hot Rum. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. Hope you have a good, fantastic rest of your week. In the meantime, we'll see you Friday. And in the meantime, sail fast, sail safe, and have fun. Ciao. Bye.
Bye.